we have been left behind. Many of our people continue to live in squalor and poverty, so many of them living in overcrowded misery and suffering at the capital, where the slums of the poor surround the tall buildings of the wealthy, where everyone, rich and poor, suffers from the oppression of over-centralization. But we are blessed with a beautiful country, and we have the potential for great progress and prosperity. All we need is a new beginning to bring us a better tomorrow. We must welcome job-creating foreign direct investors. We need federalism to decongest the capital and develop the regions. We need a parliamentary system for long-term leadership and sustainable good governance. The Philippines needs constitutional reform.
I don't want to start any blasphemous rumours, but I think Monsott's got a sixth sense of humour, and when I die, I expect to find him laughing.
Okay, good morning, everyone. My name is Orion, Pérez, Dumdum, and we're here actually to take a very close look at federalism. So today, I'm actually joined by my good friend and fellow discussant and researcher on constitutional reform for the Philippines. We actually have this guy. He's based out of Australia, and he is a practitioner. He's actually working on his PhD as well, and he basically knows the ins and outs of the federal parliamentary system because he works inside and within the Australian federal parliamentary system as a member of one of the departments, one of the key departments in the government of South Australia. So, ladies and gentlemen, we have here the host of the CUSP Philippines, the CUSP Philippines or CUSP PH. His name is Emmanuel Doy Santos. And he's here right now with us. Good morning, Doy.
Hi, Ryan. Hi.
All right.
Good morning.
Good to have you back. Good to have you back. So, ladies and gentlemen, please
Thanks for having me back.
Oh, obviously, it's always a pleasure, man. So, ladies and gentlemen, let's make sure that you keep on sharing and spamming and making this particular broadcast go viral. We need a lot of people to learn more about federalism. So please, just share it right now. Please, we need to have at least 100 people watching. Right now, I only see 40. That's not good enough. We need 100 people for this to be really worthwhile. So please, let's spread the news, get more people to watch this so that a lot of people in the Philippines can learn about federalism. All right. So, Doy, kumusta? What do we have for today? Hi, Doy. Are you there? Can you hear? Hello? Okay, parang may ano yata technical difficulties.
Sorry, yeah. There's a bit of a lag.
A lag?
No, that's
there's a bit of lag.
Sorry, I missed your question. Yeah.
Yeah. I was going to ask you, what do we have for today what do we have in store so that we can talk about this topic? I actually have some slides that you sent.
Well, yes. We've got a lot to talk about right now because I noticed when we talked about parliamentary system last time, there was a lot of interest. Pero yung federal, napansin ko, medyo hirap maka-pick up, no? Kasi like lots of people really don't understand, what's the real benefit. And parang yung frame of reference din nila is, again, the United States. That's a particular type of federalism. And so a lot of, in preparation for the show, I mean, I am a practitioner. I've been working in the civil service here in Australia for about 15 to 16 years now. And I also consulted for the Australian Foreign Affairs Department when I did projects to help the civil service in the Philippines.
Mm-hmm.
So I kind of know both systems. And but what I'd like in preparation for this show, para naman hindi tayo parang self-reinforcing feedback loop, I tried to open up my mind and look at, what were the pros and cons that were yung binabato na mga arguments against federalism kung bakit daw hindi appropriate sa Pilipinas. And I wanted to challenge myself. Baka naman masyadong narrow na yung perspective ko. And so I think with this show we should be able to dispel some of the myths that abound. Dahil ang dami.
Indeed.
And I see parang because limited yung ating frame of reference, nagkokopyahan lang yung mga tao. Like, pag may nagsalita ng ganito, paulit-ulit. Parang yun din
lang yung mga, parang mga fake news nga di ba? Fake information.
And then as a practitioner, parang naiinis ako ng konti because I know it's not true. Well, it may be true for some states, but that's not kind of the model that I see some people pushing forward in the Philippines. So parang nagkaroon ng strongman, and then tinitira yung strawman pala, not strongman.
Strawman, yeah, strawman.
Strawman, tinitira yung strawman, pero hindi naman pala yun yung federalism na gustong
kumbaga, mini-misrepresent nila yung federalism. They're saying stuff that's not true about federalism. Sasabihin na, yan ang federalism, tapos titirahin nila yan, yung maling idea ng federalism. Sasabihin,
or it might
yan
be,
ang federalism, mali. Oh, yan.
Or it might be a type of federalism that exists somewhere, pero hindi naman talaga yun hindi lang naman yun ang model ng federalism, ano? Kumbaga, we have to adopt a model that is appropriate for the Philippines. Kaya nandito ako, just to try and dispel some of those myths and to work through some of these issues one by one, ano? So,
indeed.
If I was going to leave, three main insights for our audience today, they would be the following, no? First of all, number one, a federal system is better suited for a large, diverse country such as the Philippines in preserving its unity and in making the government more directly accountable to the people. That's number one. Pangalawa, ang mensahe ko is that a federal system is needed now because it will clarify the roles, responsibilities, and accountabilities of each level of government and allow us to design fiscal institutions compatible with delivering responsible, and results-based governance. And pangatlo, a cooperative federal system. So yun yung yun ang alam ko dito sa Australia. And yun din ang alam kong gustong gustong isulong sa Pilipinas, no? Yun ang nakikita kong mga proposals ngayon. This cooperative federal system will capacitate weaker regions and allow them to level up through fiscal equalization to be able to compete with the stronger regions. So, yung tatlong mensahe na yun ang gusto kong iiwan sa mga tagapanood natin ngayon. And yung aking conviction, no, my personal conviction for these statements, I would like to stress, comes from my own professional experience working as a civil servant in a federal system here in Australia. But not only that, I work for a small state for the state government in a small state known as South Australia in Adelaide, where I am based. Now, South Australia, being a small state compared to New South Wales, where Sydney and Victoria, where Melbourne is, it would be otherwise disadvantaged under a unitary setup. Kaya, from my personal dealings with the Commonwealth of the federal government and with other state governments, I know for a fact that a federal system helps the model that a cooperative federal model that we've adopted here, which very few people are aware of, is more conducive to help smaller, less developed regions in a country to develop, or to at least provide equal opportunity for education and health and all those other services at the same standard and at the same level as the richer regions. Kasi yung frame of reference natin is the United States, where you go to
competitive federalism.
Competitive siya, parang kanya-kanyang diskarte. And if you go to some of the southern states, the Appalachian region, Kentucky, Alabama, yung mga ganong states, it's almost like being in a different country. You actually don't even need to go that far. You go to the Rust Belt states like Ohio, Michigan, where Detroit is, Pennsylvania, and it's the same thing. Parang napag-iwanan na rin sila. Kasi in the United States, the kind of federal model they have there is competitive. It's up to each state to develop their own taxes, to develop their own regulation, and to provide whatever services that they deem fit. So as a result, a child growing up in one of the poorer states like Kentucky will not have the access to the same level of service, and that's not true in Australia, or I think Canada, or even the EU. So these federations have adopted, and we'll get into the technicalities. No, they've adopted a cooperative model. So yun ang tatlong mensahe ko. It's better suited for us because we're a large and diverse country. It's needed now because it will help clarify for us the roles that each layer and level of government needs to take up. And thirdly, it will capacitate the weaker regions and help them to level up. So yun yung tatlo. And I look forward to this discussion. Sana na mahimay-himay natin. We'll unpack each of those as we go along.
Yun na nga. Yeah, that's really good. Especially that, when you mentioned that difference between competitive and cooperative, I think that's a really, really important thing. And maybe I'll just also add, that contrary to what so many people think, there's not one model. I mean, it's very clear, from that alone, yung competitive versus cooperative. But then at the end of the day, also, unlike say a parliamentary system where there are really clear-cut structures that must be present, although you can tweak a lot of different things. You can tweak the what kind of electoral system you're going to have in a parliamentary system. In federalism, you are way more, way more flexible in choosing what kinds of features are going to be devolved and which ones are going to be very much federal in nature. So parang uniform across the countries, across the different states or regions, whereas which ones are going to be, yun nga, parang kayo nang bahala dyan. So I think a lot of Filipinos make that mistake. I actually recently saw a discussion in the wall, the timeline of one of the professors that I really admire, si Professor Clarita Carlos ng UP Diliman.
UP.
And Juan Ponce Enrile. Juan Ponce Enrile knows her, no? So he actually commented commented negatively towards federalism. Parang sinasabi niya na pag federalism parang watak-watak ang lalabas. Parang that's what he mistakenly thought.
Yes.
One of my followers actually went there and corrected him and said, "Sir, mali po kayo because the what do you call this? Hindi naman porket dun sa US each state has their own police force, for example, ganun sa lahat ng countries na may federalism. The Philippines can very likely just leverage off what we already have right now, PNP, which is very similar to what they have in Malaysia. In Malaysia, they have the Royal Malaysian Police, which handles the whole country. So wala sila yung mga state police.
Merong federal police, and then merong, like in Australia, may AFP, Australian Federal Police. Yun yung parang FBI, and then meron yung state police departments. So sa akin, isa yun sa mga pwede nating i-dispel, kasi yung common yun sa Pilipinas na they equate federalism with regionalization, and pag sinabi mong regionalization, magkakawatak-watak ang Pilipinas, Pero Ryan, gusto ko lang banggitin at the onset kung bakit ngayon kailangan i-discuss natin to, Why is it so important at this point in time? Sa dami ng problema ng bansa, may COVID, may economic recession, bakit ito kailangan isulong, I'm not sure if a lot of people aren't aware of this, pero next year will be the year in which the Supreme Court ruling made back in 2019 on the Mandanas Garcia petition
yes
is going to be implemented. And ano yung Mandanas Garcia petition? The decision of the Supreme Court, it ruled with finality that all sources of revenue at the national government level are going to be used for the computation of the internal revenue allotment or ERA. Right? Yung pumupunta sa LGUs, no? Provinces, cities, municipalities, barangays. It used to be 40% of just the income tax, personal and business. Na ginagamit yon 40% pinapamudmod sa mga local governments. Ngayon, but the local government code did not specify that. So ang petition na nila is, can you interpret the law, Supreme Court? Anong sabi ng Supreme Court? Hindi lang yung income tax ng BIR, kundi pati yung value-added tax, yung excise tax, yung mga pinasang bagong taxes under the train law, yung expanded value-added tax, excise tax, pati yung customs duties. Kasama yan, ang basihan yan sa computation ng IRA. So, next year, when the new government supposedly is elected and comes in, it's going to be facing the bill for that, which is estimated at 234.4 billion by our economic managers. No, 234 billion on top of what they normally receive. And every year, tumataas kasi ang income tax. There's a 3-year lag. So the taxes the IRA in 2022 is based on the taxes generated back in 2019. Kaya binigyan niya ng 3-year lag. Yung 2019 decision ng Supreme Court, sabi niya, effective ito sa 2022. Ngayon, sabihin mo, ano bang problema doon? Di ba? So, yung mga LGUs, lalong madadagdagan yung niya. The problem is, magagaling yan from the national government. The national government is in the middle of the COVID pandemic max vaccination program. Hanggang next year yan. Hanggang 2023 pa nga . Although they're relying on the LGUs to help with the contact tracing, mga ganito ganyan. But and this is happening as the tax revenues are going down ng mga LGUs. I think they were slashed in half by the Bureau of Local Government Finance, yung expectations for next year. So, ang mangyayari nito, well, that's good. So the LGUs, may pang-takip-butas sila. Pero, ang national government, walang pang-takip-butas yan. And, remember, we might be cutting taxes on corporate income tax because of the CREATE law. So how the national government is managing this is, Secretary Dominguez has said, they're going to offload 404 billion worth of projects that used to be run by the national government. Projects, programs, things like construction of roads, things like education, things like health. And you remember the last time this happened? Back in 1991, when the local government code was first enacted, that was, again, the year before an election year. When the Ramos administration came in 1992, it had to allot 30%, kasi yung transition period, 30% muna . So they had to allot 30% of their... So how Ramos tried to manage it by saying, hindi, BIR lang, yung income tax lang, yung interpretation nila. So that yun ang history nun . Kaya ever since, it was always based. So ngayon, pero ang health services, dinevolve nila sa local government. So anong nangyari? Underfunded ang health services. Kaya humina ang serbisyo. Bumaba ang kalidad ng serbisyo at the local level dahil hindi sapat yung pondo na binigay sa kanila. Kasi akala nila 30% ng buong ngayon hindi pala, hinold back. And then ang ginawa pa ni Ramos was like DBM niya, hino-hold niya. Pabugso-bugso lang. Kapag may pera, okay, iwawaldas nila. Pag wala, hino-hold nila to keep the budget in balance. Pero there was a sequence of decisions na sinabing, hindi, automatic yan. So through the years, naging automatic fiscal transfer na siya. Kaso ngayon, as this new ruling comes into play next year, these these programs, activities, and projects are going to be devolved. So if that does not happen, the national government does not devolve it, it will still shoulder the cost. It will have to borrow more money to the tune of 1% of GDP or more, and that will put a strain on our budget. If it devolves it too quickly, and the LGUs are not able to absorb it, makakandaloko-loko na yung COVID response and recovery program natin next year. So, ang sinasabi ko, federalism kasi helps to clarify the roles, responsibilities, and accountabilities at each level of government. Hindi yung DOF lang or yung DBM lang ang magde-decide, ito na sa inyo. Bahala na kayo dyan. Under a unitary system, ganyan talaga ang mangyayari. They can just decide to do that. Whereas under a federal system, it is clarified by both federal and regional governments, and so klaro kung sino yung responsible dyan. And then, ang kaakibat niyan is yung fiscal institutions will make it such that kung ito yung responsibility mo, i-design siya in such a way na yung pondo magiging sapat. Hindi siya bara-bara na basta lang kung ano lang ang decide ng central government, yun ang mangyayari. Hindi pwedeng ganun eh. We already saw back in 1992 how it suffered massively because of that. And that's one of the reasons why Erap Estrada became president, because Erap promised better health service to the masses. And in fact, he did that in his first few years. It all started when this devolution under a unitary setup was just done sort of randomly and wasn't planned carefully. So that's why I'm saying we kind of need to hit pause on this devolution somehow and kind of figure out, first of all, how is this going to proceed? We can't just, it's a fiscal, and that's my first slide, no? It's a fiscal train wreck that is fast approaching us next year. And hindi napapag-usapan yan. Pero believe it or not, mangyayari yan next year. So do you want the next government to be saddled with this problem? Hindi, no? It needs to be tackled today. It needs to be tackled as soon as possible, itong federalism. Otherwise, ganyan na mangyayari. We're gonna be like the deer staring at the headlights on the oncoming fiscal train wreck, fiscal car heading our way. And who knows what's gonna happen next year? Could be chaos.
Grabe, no? So talagang problema. Kasi lumalabas nga, without federalism, parang unilateral ang pag-decide ng national government sa paano gagawin yung funding and all this stuff. Whereas with federalism, naging clearly delineated sino yung who handles what. And I think it's pretty clear, no? I think this is the main thing that a lot of people need to really understand. Whenever there is a responsibility that is given to a particular level of government or layer of government, that particular layer of government should also be given a corresponding, say, funding to go with that. Authority and / powers and funding to go along with that particular responsibility. Hindi naman pwedeng responsibility lang tapos walang kaakibat na powers and funding. And on the other hand, hindi rin pwedeng puro lang funding and powers lang. Dapat talaga merong kaakibat din na responsibility, which is what we clearly, and accountability, you know? Kasi yun ang hindi naiintindihan ng maraming mga kumukontra sa federalism. They keep on saying, ano yan, you're giving more power to the people, to those local leaders, ganyan. Pero nakalimutan nila, meron pala kasing kasamang accountability and responsibility. So all right, let's I was thinking, do you want to go with the slides now? We can
definitely. We could. Well, in a minute, we could stick to the deer in the headlights. I just want that to be in people's mind, no?
Yeah.
Hindi tayo pwede kasi tayo, parang bahala na. bara-bara, bahala na, it's the next administration's problem. It's not our, pass the buck, kick the can down the road. Ganyan ang mangyayari. Although, sinasabi ni Secretary Dominguez, we are preparing for a seamless transition. But given our experience in the past, under a unitary setup, I have no confidence that we're going to be able to manage this seamlessly. I have no confidence.
I totally agree. I totally agree.
Diba? Kaya, so that's the problem we're facing. Kaya this has to be top of mind right now. Because it will impact the COVID response. It will impact the way we promote economic recovery. But, before we go into the technical details of federalism, I'd like to, first of all, lay down some first principles. First principles. We have to go back to first principles, as in way back. I'm talking about back in the 18th century in France. There was a guy named Montesquieu. I don't know, and that's my next slide. Right.
Baron de la Brede, Baron de la Brede et de la Montesquieu. That's Charles de Secondat.
Oui.
I'm a big fan of that guy.
Wow,
I'm a big fan of that guy. So basically, one of the things he's known for is he said na yung cold countries basically are more parang more compatible with democracy than warm countries. Warm countries, parang sabi nga niya, mas likely na maging successful yung mga tawag nito, yung mga colder countries are able to be successful under democracy, and likely because of the cold weather forcing people to save and be more disciplined. They have to work hard. Tapos sabi niya, yung mga maiinit na bansa, parang more likely to be lazy. Tagayan. So sabi niya, para maging successful yung mga maiinit na bansa, kailangan silang puwersahan. Kailangan medyo may pagka-stricto. Which is actually what ended up happening in Singapore. Na kinakailangan stricto. Kasi kung hindi sila stricto doon, dito sa Singapore, people would be just lazing around and parang banjing-banjing lang ang mangyayari. So yun. All right.
Actually,
so
he was a child of so then my next slide will show his profile. But he was a child of the Enlightenment. Yung statement niyang yon, hindi lang opinion niya yon. He actually conducted some experiments with cow's tongues. So he's like a typical child of the Enlightenment. He was like a
Renaissance man.
Renaissance man.
Marami siyang alam. Actually, also Thomas Hobbes was similar. Thomas Hobbes, very similar to him, and I think they were kind of not exactly contemporaries, pero pareho sila na they also dabbled in physical science. So Thomas Hobbes, he dabbled in physics. Optics, yung mga ganon, optics. Ito naman siya, may pagka-biology yung kanyang ibang mga...
Yeah, he used like cow's tongues. He looked at, when it was frozen, ganito. So he tried to base it on empirical research, whether it's true or not. Basta he was trying to use it based on scientific proof, Pero but another thing he's known for as well is the doctrine of separation of powers.
Yes, that's right.
So he was a judge and we're part of the Parlement in Bordeaux. And so he was also part of the aristocracy. And his main concern was that in France in the 18th century, King Louis XIV, the Sun King, was becoming very autocratic and despotic towards his subjects and declaring war, spending money. And he was looking across to the English Channel and seeing in England a more liberal country where subjects were free. Even the king was subject to the rule of law. His powers were checked by parliament. And so he wanted, but it shouldn't have been that way. France was a big country. It should have been the dominant power. So ang main thrust niya was, bakit ganon? Parang Pilipinas, we should have been more developed given our resources, our talents. Pero bakit hindi? Why a puny country like Singapore has overtaken us? So parang ganun yung sitwasyon yung problem na kinaharap niya nung time na yon. So he studied the ancient civilizations of Greece and Rome, and he came up with this principle. He said, democracies can only survive in small republics. Small republics lang. like in ancient
Venice.
Athens, Venice, Rome, when it began, was a democracy after all. So sabi niya, it can only thrive kasi they had direct democracy, no? They went to
Yes.
the public forum and they made debates, the citizens, and they made decisions that way. Of course, it was also like a very patriarchal, and only the men had the rights, and they were very exploitative of their women and their slaves. But be that as it may, at that time kasi yun lang ang alam nila. So smaller republics, that's where democracies can thrive. But the problem with small republics is that they become susceptible to invasion from large powers, as what happened in the Peloponnesian War when the Persians came and tried to dominate the Greeks. Same with Rome at the beginning; they were beset with enemies on all sides. But the problem, he said, with large republics is that they become unwieldy and government becomes very distant from the people, and as a result, less accountable and more corrupt, which is what happened under the Roman Republic when it grew so big that it became, in fact, an empire. And so they were not able to exercise, Julius Caesar, from that time, naging emperor na yung head nung
Naging dictator siya.
Oh, the Senate was kind of abolished. Parang Star Wars. Parang yung intro mo. Diba? So, kasi masyadong lumaki na, unwieldy na. So, ang solution that Montesquieu came up with was that to form a federation of small republics. That's how democracy will survive. That's how governments can still remain accountable to the people. So, as the republic grows, kailangan nang i-federalize para ma-maintain yung accountability, responsiveness to the people. Yun yung solution niya. And ito yung inadapt ng mga American founding fathers in 1788 when they pushed for a federal system, with a strong central government, from what was a loose confederation of states that from 1781. So the American Federalists took the ideas of Montesquieu and put them into practice. Hindi na implement sa France, ironically, yung mga ideas ni Montesquieu, but in-implement siya sa United States. Kaya naging federal republic ang US, So, yun ang dahilan. So, merong checks and balances because he said yung mga subnational parts, constituent parts of the federation, they will perform a check on the central government. They will consist of intermediary powers, intermediate. So between the central, national, and so kung King Louis lang, the monarch can make all those decisions. Hindi. These regions can perform a check on the central authority. And in that way, magiging mas accountable sila to the people. So, as I have a quote, as Anwar Shah, director of public economics at the World Bank, and editor of the book called A Global Dialogue on Federalism. It's on my next slide.
Next slide. Okay, let's put
that.
Yeah.
He said, and I quote in this book, "Power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. Federalism helps to break the monopoly of power in the national order by bringing decision-making closer to the people through localizing it. Localization strengthens government accountability to citizens by involving them in monitoring government performance and demanding corrective action." So, ganun, So, tama nga, no? So, when you reflect on this, you might consider that some of regions in the Philippines have grown so large, as in the case of Metro Manila, that managing them requires a more integrated executive branch, which can override the parochial interests of its constituent parts, namely the 13 cities and municipalities that make up the region. Many say this would be a huge improvement on the Metro Manila Development Authority, which operates on the basis of consensus, like a loose confederation of cities. So yun ang kagandahan. We need to aggregate power up and give more accountability to this MMDA. Kasi hindi siya makapag-function ng maayos kasi parang wala siyang enough powers and wala siyang fiscal base.
Oo nga eh.
And
I noticed this, no? This, like, for example, there was this time when they have, I'm sure you know about this. They call it color coding, or unified
yes.
vehicle reduction program, 'di ba? Parang yung ending, 'di ba, 1 and 2 is for Monday, 3 and 4 is
Yeah.
Tuesday, mga ganyan. So,
Yeah.
nangyari, it became parang up to the cities, the constituent cities of Metro Manila to decide kung mag-opt-in ba sila o hindi. So there was a time, in fact, when Marikina and Pasig actually did not
Yes.
implement it anymore. Parang sabi nila, okay naman kami dito ngayon. So lumalabas na may mga lugar na parang okay ka na dumaan kahit bawal dapat ang kotse mo. Tapos paglabas, nagkamali ka ng turn. Oops, nasa Mandaluyong na pala ako. Oops, ay patay. Hinuli ka. Ganun. Ay, sir, di ko alam. Nagkamali ako. Left turn daw eh. Napunta ako dito. Parang ganun.
And nung naging MMDA si Bayani Fernando, kasi I was a resident of Marikina at that time, parang he tried to impose, kaso hindi rin magawa niya lahat ng gusto niyang gawin kasi limitado yung kanyang kapangyarihan bilang MMDA chair.
Yung kanyang authority as MMDA chair is very parang coordination based lang, no? The real power kasi resides in the city mayors talaga. So he just brings them together and then suggests stuff with baka kailangan yung gawin to para but then that doesn't work very well when all these cities are next to each other, sharing streets, sharing resources.
Yeah, there's spillover. And the thing is, yung mga botante, yung iniisip ng bawat mayor, yung mga botante nila, hindi nila iniisip yung mga botante ng karatig bayan, no? So wala silang pakialam, kumbaga, kung maapektuhan sila ng mga decision niya. Basta sa kanya, ang importante, maging masaya yung kanyang botante. So yun lang iniisip niya eh. Yung MMD chair, walang electoral mandate yan eh.
Oo nga.
Wala siyang So wala rin siya. Yeah, parang through mutual consensus and agreement lang yung pagkahalal sa kanya ng mga mayors. So yun ang problema. And in the regions naman, we have the regional development councils, which is made up of provincial governors. And again, it operates on the basis of consensus. Kaso, recommendatory lang yung kanilang powers. They can only recommend what projects the national government would implement in the region. My dad was an RDC chair back in 1988. And as provincial governor of his province, Nueva Ecija, he would go to San Fernando once or twice a week, sign the papers, but by and large, and this RDC was an innovation created under the Marcos administration. Dati walang ganun eh. Parang to allow consultation with the regions para may input sila dun sa national economic planning, no? So it was a good innovation at the time. And in the 80s, it was good. It was good kasi they get to really lobby Manila as a group, hindi yung bawat probinsya lang. Kaso nga lang, ganun eh, parang some provinces kasi within a region, hindi naman lahat ng probinsya ng Central Luzon kasing yaman or kasing lakas ng mga like Pampanga or Bulacan. Yun ang mga mayayaman na probinsya. Meron ding mga, like places like Bataan, or Aurora na hindi naman, they're on the fringes, no? So in a way, by setting up a regional development council, parang they get to wield more, they get to have a voice, a greater voice if they act collectively than separately and individually. Kaso nga lang, wala rin electorate eh. So nung panahon na yun, iniisip ko sa sarili ko, Dad, bakit mo pa pinagugugulan ng panahon yung pagiging RDC chair mo? Wala namang nakakaalam na talagang yun ang na ginagampanan mo yung trabaho, yung tungkulin na yun. Isipin mo na lang yung ano mo kasi at that time, very violent ang probinsya niya. Like, he survived 8 assassination attempts.
Oh my gosh.
The last of which was yung meeting de avance niya, hinagisan siya ng granada sa entablado.
Oh
this
my
is in
gosh.
in the northern part of the province. So sabi ko noong panahon na yan, Dad, pinagugugulan mo pa ng panahon yan, ang dami mo mga problema sa probinsya mo. So kasi wala ngang electoral mandate. I mean, you could say na from there he could probably run for higher office. But the thing is, nobody knows you. Nobody recognizes your work.
Actually, we don't get any news about the regional development councils at all. I don't even know who's. I'm from Region 7, kasi Cebu. But I don't even know who's the regional development council chairman there.
It's a thankless job.
Walang nangyayari.
You don't get credit. You don't get credit for and the thing is, we could actually be setting up a regional governments as a platform for higher office. We could like be promoting people. Bago ka maging presidente, kung kunwari mayor. So ang nangyayari ngayon, yung mga city mayors ang tumatakbo for national office, like si Binay, Erap, and Duterte. There's nothing wrong with that. Pero sana, Duterte himself said, I was surprised. I was not prepared dito sa mga problemang kinahaharapan ko ngayon. Kasi as a mayor, ganun lang yung scope niya. So na-elect siya, parang sabi niya, he was almost like overwhelmed, di ba? Kasi wala nga sistema that lets you rise. And ang problema ngayon under the local government code, the provinces are almost irrelevant. Why? Because the taxation powers for real property tax is given to the cities.
Cities, yes.
So they actually have a stronger fiscal capacity than the provinces. And what happens a lot of the time is nababypass na lang yung provincial government to get to the cities. Cities are...
Speaking about this, I was gonna comment, na part of the problem we have in the Philippines regarding the provinces is that the provinces were never really meant to be like the states of the U.S. I don't know if you realize that, but when I was doing my research on this, I realized, teka lang, when the Americans set up the system, they borrowed the terminology provinces from the Spaniards who set up the provincial system in the Philippines, but they modified it so that the provinces do not actually correspond to the states in the US. What happens is the Philippines was considered like a state, of the US, and then the provinces were considered like the counties of the states.
Yes.
So within the state, kasi, you have these smaller sub-state areas called the counties, right? In the county system but particularly in Virginia is the model that the Philippines ended up copying, or that was imposed upon us, Virginia. So the Commonwealth of Virginia, which is the state of Virginia, they have the state of Virginia. Tapos underneath the state of Virginia, they have the counties, and underneath the counties they have their towns and cities. The problem is they have that system where if a city becomes rich enough, that city becomes independent of its county. Okay, so they have all these, they have a lot of these little cities that are inside. They are located inside a county. Kapangalan pa nila yung county. Okay, it serves as the seat of the county, but it is not administratively part of the county. And we copied that in the Philippines. Hiwalay na sila. We copied that in the Philippines. That's why in the Philippines, we have, Philippines, underneath the Philippines, you have yung so-called provinces, so to speak. Yeah. But underneath the provinces, you have cities and you have component cities and municipalities. But if a component city becomes rich enough, it becomes independent of the province.
Yeah.
So like you have... like in Cebu, for example, Cebu City Cebu City is the seat of Cebu Province. That's where the Capitolio is. That's where the government of Cebu Province is. But Cebu City is not part of Cebu Province. Whatever money is made by Cebu City does not get shared with the rest of the province at all. So,
parang chartered, ano na siya,
chartered city na siya. And we got that system from the Americans, from the state of Virginia.
And that's why our senators are elected at large. Kasi they thought the Philippines, they conceived of us as a state.
Yes.
And totoo naman na at that time, our population at the time of the American administration was something like 6 million lang. So, kayang-kaya lang, no? Parang the size of Singapore is now. A little bit bigger.
Yeah. Konti lang ang mga tao at that time.
It was very sparsely populated at the time. Kaya pwede talagang ituring na parang estado siya, no? Pero ngayon na 100 ilan ba? 114
110 na yata. Mga 109, 110.
Oo. Tapos ganun pa rin, it doesn't quite work. And the other thing as well, while we're on the subject, kasi we now have 81 provinces. It's gonna become 82, 83. If Palawan gets split into 3 provinces, if Duterte signs the law that was passed, the recent law.
Grabe. Do you want to move a slide for that, or?
Yeah, I have a slide which compares the number of subnational jurisdictions in different countries, whether federal or unitary. Tignan nyo, sa US, 330 million ang populasyon. Ilan ang probinsya nila? Ilan? 52 lang. 52, 330. Ang Mexico, 126 million.
Well, I mean, 50 states plus 2 major territories. So
Puerto Rico and DC?
And DC,
okay.
yeah.
Mexico, population 126 million. So parang katulad natin, ilan ang probinsya nila? 32. India, 1.4 billion. And it only has 29 states. Sabihin mo, hindi, kasi contiguous yung land area nila. Tayo, archipelago. Tingnan mo yung Indonesia. 330 million, kasi laki ng US. Indonesia is also an archipelago, by the way. But the Philippines, with less than half the number of its islands, they have 17,500 islands. The Philippines has a half of the island, 7,200 lang tayo. We have a sixth of their landmass and about a third of the population. But we have more than twice the number of provinces. How do you account for that? When they say that federalism will bring about the creation of mini fiefdoms, it will just create, dadami lang ang political dynasties natin. Tingnan nyo naman. We are creating mini fiefdoms left, right, and center. Diba? Palawan is just the latest example, by the way. Ano pa ba mga example na nangyari noon? Mindoro yata was split. Naging Oriental and Occidental.
Yes.
You remember the time na sabi ni Marroas about the BARM, no? Sabi niya, hindi ako papayag na ma-chop-chop ang Pilipinas. Tingnan mo yung Guimaras, na chop-chop siya sa Iloilo. Di ba? And wala kang naririnig sa kanila na complaint. Walang daing na, anong nangyari dito? Bakit dumadami? Why is it happening? And so, ito yung rebuttal dun sa mga nagsasabing magkakawatak-watak ang Pilipinas, magkakaroon ng mini fiefdoms, magtatayo ng mga kingdoms, yung mga local kingpins na yan. Imbis na sa probinsya nila, buong region, dominate nila. Ito ang masasabi natin. It's happening right before our eyes.
Under a unitary system.
Under a unitary system already. We're breaking up. We're breaking up the country.
Parami mga probinsya. Grabe.
Yeah, so hindi tayo conscious na this practice has been going on under a unitary setup, and we don't seem to though I don't hear any of the woke crowd saying, political dynasties, are multiplying. Kasi let's get real. Bakit ba hinahati yung mga... Kasi isipin nyo, 23% lang nung era is allotted to provinces nationwide. So whatever so 40% of the national revenue goes to era. 23% is allotted to provinces under the formula. So if you increase the number of provinces, what happens to the share of each province? Naturally, lumiliit, paliit ng paliit. They have to split the pie with more, they have to slice it more. And then you have duplicate, so you have the same number of officials in each province. So dumadami ang official. Because that's another criticism they say of federalism. Magastos kasi dadami ang mga pwesto. Diba? Yung estimate nila, they even came up with a price tag, diba? 44 to 71 billion daw, depending on which model you apply. But they don't take into account that this province splitting is multiplying the number of provincial, yung mga sangguniang panlalawigan, yung mga provincial governors, yung mga empleyado ng bawat probinsya. Split yan eh.
Grabe.
So, isipin mo kung negosyante ka sa Iloilo ng time na yon, imbes na isang kapitolyo lang ang lalapitan mo, ngayon dalawa na. At baka iba pa yung pinapairal dun sa Guimaras kaysa sa Iloilo proper. So, Palawan, pag hinati yan sa tatlo, imbes na isang kapitolyo lang ang pupuntahan mo ngayon, tatlo na. Tatlo na ang problema mo. Pag negosyante ka sa Palawan, tatlong regulasyon na, tatlong paperwork. So dumadami rin yung So, ibig ko sabihin, this is not rational. We are an anomaly in this set. No, instead of splitting provinces, what we actually should be doing
is consolidating.
Yes, reamalgamating them.
That's the whole point nga of the federalist push. Almost practically all major drafts talking about federalism, they don't aim to increase the number of subnational units like the provinces. Ang aim nga nila is to bring like-minded, similar provinces together and consolidate them into regions para mas may economies of scale sila. Diba?
Yes,
so,
yes.
Yun nga yung parang hindi naintindihan ng ibang mga kumukontra.
While preserving the diversity and the preferences of So if we go to my next slide, this is a quote again from Anwar Shah from the same book, where he goes, "Federal fiscal constitutions have been recommended for large and diverse countries because they create incentives for multiple orders of government to provide services to their citizens in a competitive, efficient, equitable, and responsible manner. This is accomplished while respecting diversity in local identities and preferences. Federal fiscal constitutions pay special attention to regional, economic, and digital divides to ensure a level playing field and to strengthen the economic union." Ayon. So it's really applicable to a country like the Philippines with 110 million people spread over 7,000 islands. The larger and more diverse your country is, it's more appropriate to adopt the federal model so that each region, so that they perform that intermediary check,
Yes,
against the central authority. And as a result, they compete. Like, so if the national government is slack, they can pick up the slack. And if they belong to different parties, kunwari, the governor of this region can outcompete the president, he can make him look bad eh. So ngayon, mapapesa yung president or prime minister, the national government, to do a better job, di ba? Kasi parang nakakahiya eh. Ka-rival nilang partido eh, di ba? Tapos pinapakita nila na mas maganda yung governance nila. So they compete.
I'll give an example. I'll give an example there, no? Malaysia, for example. So in Malaysia, for the longest time, before Mahathir did his comeback, na against siya sa dati niyang partido, no? But before that, yung time ni Najib, so Najib was of course Barisan Nasional, UMNO, United
Yes.
Malays National Organization. Tapos yung they were the ones that group was handling the federal, the national, country itself.
Yeah. Yeah.
But the DAP, the basically there was this
Opposition party.
opposition party that was
Yeah.
handling Penang. And
Yes.
Penang was doing whatever it could to be very similar to Singapore. So yung kumukuha
Yes.
sila ng marami mga investor,
Oo.
nakuha nila yung Dell. Ang daming mga companies na nag-set up doon ngayon sa Penang. So parang napakita ng na-outshine nila, pinakita
yung
nila
corrupt si Najib, yung corrupt government at the federal, may pakita nila ito honest, ito magandang patakbo. So parang yun competitive, efficient, and equitable. Whereas ngayon lahat sila baw kung sino man yung nasa Malacanang, di ba? Lahat baw sa unitary system. And so lahat tuloy sumusunod kung anong ehemplo ng Malacanang. Kung corrupt yung Malacanang official, parang gaya-gaya na rin ang mga probinsya, di ba? Kasi you have to roll with it, di ba? Makikisama ka na lang. Kung yun ang sistema, makisama ka na lang. Whereas kung may autonomy, magandang example yun na talagang you can show. And then, you can create that as a base to run for national office so that nasasalang yung mga leaders natin. Parang yung sa parliamentary, nasasalang. Dito, nasasalang din sila.
Yeah, I think another example there is India. And what you were exactly saying, Doy, yung sinasabi mong it can become a platform for moving towards the national, higher office. So si Modi, Narendra Modi, who is from the BJP, he was actually the chief minister before of Gujarat. In India, no? So Gujarat. So yeah, dun siya based sa Ahmedabad. So si Narendra Modi, of course, comes from what was originally an opposition party against the Indian National Congress. So Indian National Congress is the founding party of India, di ba? Yung kina Gandhi, yung grupo ni Nehru, ganyan. So essentially, itong si Narendra Modi, he was chief minister of his
head.
state. Siya yung head. Siya yung parang mini prime minister ng kanyang head. And marami siyang magandang nagawa economically doon sa kanilang lugar. Kaya nga naging sikat yung kanyang state, and napakita niya kaya kung gawin yan sa
naging launching pad. Whereas ngayon, kung governor ka ng isang probinsya, mahirap tumakbo sa national kasi parang napakaliit lang nung jurisdiction mo, tapos wala pang powers.
Yeah. Here's one thing about being a governor of a province. So very related to what I was saying earlier about the problem of having these independent cities, no? Na kumbaga, when you are a governor of a province, tapos sinabi mo, okay, itong mga component, I want the province to rise up in terms of its economy. So you're going to say, I will go out of my way to bring in as many investors as possible to set up in my component cities.
Yeah.
So, sabihin natin naging successful ka, nakuha mo yung mga maraming investor na magse-set up ng mga parang pesa-pesa, may mga pesa ka dyan in your own small cities that are under your province. Dumating yung mga kumpanya, dumami yung pera ng cities. Yung city na yan yumaman.
Hindi na siya, yung probinsya mo.
Hindi na siya, mangyari, yumaman siya.
Magiging hihiwalay na siya.
Magiging hihiwalay na siya. So, magiging mayaman siya, and then it becomes its own city na, sorry alis na kami. Independent na kami sa inyo. So, ikaw yung nagbuhos ng effort na pinayaman mo yung city na yan, nawawala rin siya sa'yo. So, walang incentive talaga.
Parang it goes against,
it goes against
your interests.
If you were the governor of a province and you really go out of your way na papasukin mo yung mga investors para mag-create jobs dyan, yumaman yung lugar, bigla siyang mawawala sa'yo in a few years. So wala ka talagang incentive.
Let's get real here, no? Let's get real. The reason why we love splitting provinces is not because it will improve governance. In fact, it will weaken it. But the
Yeah,
reason why
yeah.
we love doing it, and Congress keeps passing this, is because it helps guarantee. Kung dati, dalawa yung political clans na nag-aaway-away sa probinsya,
They'll have their own turf
ngayon,
now.
pwede na nila ngayon paghatian yung probinsya para siya na lang yung big fish doon.
Oo.
Hindi na sila magkaribal.
Oo.
So,
May sarili na.
may sariling fiefdom na, ano tawag mo doon? Fiefdom. Sariling fiefdom mo na talaga yon.
Oo.
And so, it has nothing to do with improving the services to the people. It's more about preserving their stranglehold over ever narrowing bailiwicks in the country. So that they can keep, and so the reason why they're opposed to federalism is because if you create another layer, and this guy, he can like, ibis na ikaw lang yung solo kingpin sa probinsya mo, ngayon, dalawa na kayo. Dalawa na kayo. So like, so ganun like, kaya yun ang nakikita kong dahilan kung bakit maraming kumukontra rito among our national leaders. No, kasi happy na sila where they are Kontento na sila. They can have this section of Palawan all to themselves. And sila nang bahala doon, sila nang nakikinabang doon. They can perpetuate themselves longer because wala na silang karibal Nandun na siya doon sa other half ng Palawan. So, yun lang ang dahilan ang nakikita ko kung bakit this has become the practice in the Philippines.
By the way, Doy, I was going to mention also, na, I don't know if you recall na ang dami talaga sa Pilipinas na kumukontra sa federalism na puro fake news ang sinasabi or misdirection ang ginagawa. So, one of the things they kept on saying is, federalism masama yan kasi yung mga, tingnan mo nga, yung mga provinces, they're so poor, they're not able to sustain themselves. They're all sabi nila, all provinces in the Philippines are dependent on IRA. But what they don't realize is because the algorithm of how it works makes it so. Because the only self-sufficient entities are actually the independent cities.
Yeah, because of the real property tax. They have that.
The independent
the cities that have, so in Cebu City, that's where the richest people live, di ba? The subdivisions. So malaki yung real property tax na sisingil nila, no? Dun sa city na yun. And cities are the only ones who can collect this.
Have that power. They have that power.
So the provincial capitals receive 23% and cities receive 23%, municipalities receive 34% of the IRA, 20% to barangays. So they get equal share. But then they don't have equal revenue raising capacity.
Yes, that's the problem.
So this is where I'm leading to next, That federalism actually addresses the fiscal shortfalls or the variance in fiscal revenue raising capacity across jurisdictions. And unitary system, at least now under our current setup, it doesn't do that. That's why we're at risk. We're at risk once they devolve the powers. And then under the same algorithm, as you said, the same formula, it could lead to very perverse outcomes. That's why I'm very fearful that we're going to get it wrong again in 2022.
This is what I was going to say, no? Yun nga like I was saying about that stupid algorithm na first of all, cities lang ang talagang nakaka-generate. They're the real engines of growth in the country, no, yung cities. And then the cities that are rich, yun nga yung mga nagiging independent, obviously hindi na sila part ng province. So what happens is the provinces will always forever and ever, amen, per omnia secula seculorum, be poor. They will always be poor because yun nga, the rich, anytime na merong naging mayaman dyan na revenue generating, natatanggal sa kanya. Natatanggal sa probinsya. So yung province, palit yung kanyang revenue generating capacity kasi kung sino man yung mayaman, biglang naging part ng iba. Naging alis na siya.
It's a very Filipino thing, unfortunately, yung kapag may mga asosasyon hinahati.
Yes.
Yung
Oo,
mga Bicola,
nahati. Ay, naku.
di ba? When you go overseas, dalawa
Oo.
yung Cebuano Association, kunwari. Ganun lang nangyayari sa Pilipinas eh. Nagkakawatak-watak, and as a result, nagiging fragmented, inefficient, and less effective ang serbisyo na dinudulot ng mga natatanggap ng mga residente as a result. And ang yumayaman lang ay yung mga provincial officials na paghinati na, habang buhay na halos ilang henerasyon, nandun na sila. Dahil wala na silang kakumpetensya dun sa subdivided province na yun section ng province na yun. So, another quote that I have, again, from Anwar Shah, and the reason why I'm quoting extensively from him is, he's really an authority. Kino-quote talaga siya ng mga ibang scholars. No? He goes on to say that a review of comparative practices shows that...
Should I move to the next slide?
Yes, please. Okay. Yeah. A review of comparative practices shows that federal countries do better than unitary countries on all aspects of governance. All aspects.
Wow.
From citizen participation. Yes, linahat niya
Grabe.
For an economist to make such a statement, a public economist, is quite startling. But this is what he did. He says, citizen participation, political freedom, political stability, rule of law. Ito lahat ng mga to, ito yung mga binabandera ng mga liberal sa ating bansa, di ba? This is what they want. Di ba? Bureaucratic efficiency, absence of corruption, human development, egalitarian income distribution, and fiscal and economic Di ba ito yung lagi nilang sinasabi, no? Ito yung plataforma daw nila, di ba?
Original platform yan ng ng Liberal Party. Original the pre-Noy Liberal Party. Meron silang lumang website. So yung website na yon, yung I remember kasi I was really looking at the mga different party websites, no. So dati ata yun, that was liberal.org.ph yata yun, parang ganoon, or parang liberal.ph yata siya, something like that. I'm trying to remember. Pero nakita ko yun dun sa kanilang manifesto, yung kanilang website, sabi, we are open, we are for federalism, parliamentary, and economic liberalization. They were for all these reforms. Lahat ng reforma na pinag-uusapan natin, yung mga pinaglalaban nila. Kasi nga, yung original Liberal Party was for economic liberalization, was for fiscal federalism and basically decentralization. And they were also looking at the parliamentary system. Time ni Jovito Salonga, pinag-uusapan na yan Jovito Salonga was pushing for this as possible remedies for the Philippines. Then, when Noynoy came and became he became the standard bearer of his part of the Liberal Party, by February of 2010, nagbago ang website. So yung website na yun, dati, pag-click ko, liberal.ph, no? Liberal.ph, yun yung lumalabas. Pagpunta ko sa liberal.ph, biglang, ba't ang bagal ng website? So, lumalabas, nagre-redirect siya. Tapos, parang a few seconds later, nag-change siya to liberal.org.ph. Nag-change yung kanyang website. Tapos, this time it had a new look and feel, a new color scheme, na dominant yung yellow color. So nandun yung bago na yung kanyang logo, nagbago yung logo ng Liberal Party, nagkaroon na yung yellow ribbon na yan. Tapos yung kanyang naging what you call this platform ay hindi na yung we want economic liberalization for more jobs and federalism and parliamentary. Wala na silang ganun. Puro
conservative.
Ang sinabi nila ganito, ang platform namin ay walang mahirap kung walang corrupt.
Yun famous saying.
Tapos sinasabi nila, I will continue the legacy of my mother.
Kung walang corrupt, walang mahirap.
Tapos yun na yung binago na nila yung kanilang plataforma.
Slogan ng pumalit, hindi siya policy.
Wala
hindi
na
policy based.
Now, here's the funny thing.
Go ahead.
The funny thing, being an IT guy, I was wondering what the hell happened to this website. Tapos and I said, oh shit, bakit parang nag-redirect siya? So I tried this. I said, yung original website na liberal.ph lang, walang liberal.org.ph. Liberal.ph ginawa ko /HTML. Pag ganun ko, lumabas yung luma na
yung dati.
Nandun pa yung luma. Oo. So yung parang that was before So ngayon, of course, it's already been 10 years.
So may pruweba
11
ka.
years. Wala na yun.
But si Vice President Lenny Robredo, di ba tinanong niya, di ba? If federalism is the answer, then what is the problem? Parang hinihint niya, ini-imply niya na this is kung if you have a hammer, every problem is a nail. So parang she was implying that for federalists, everything can be solved by federalism. Lahat na lang ng problema. Kasi yun yung hammer, yun yung tool mo eh. Anong problema mo? Poverty, federalism. Anong problema mo? Corruption, federalism. Di ba? Every problem is a nail. Ito na nga. Tinawa yung quote niya on all aspects of government. So talaga
do better than unitary countries on all aspects of governance Grabe.
Yeah. This guy ran a regression, a statistical model where he tested federal versus unitary. And then he did find out, because this comes from the intro to this volume, which he edited. And so he featured his own empirical work. So lumabas nga, positively correlated. Just like with parliamentary, we found a lot of empirical evidence. With federalism, it's the same, it holds true. Now, when you apply it, kasi nga, it clarifies the roles and responsibilities. What we talked about earlier. That's what causes it. So, ang sagot kay Madam Vice Presidente is, if federalism is the answer, what is the question? Federalism, we can say to her, federalism is the answer to the question. What system provides better, more efficient services in a more directly accountable manner? That's the question. And by saying that federalism is the answer to that question, that statement we can say is backed up by empirical evidence from from research conducted by the World Bank. So yung paborito nilang mga international institutions, di ba?
Paborito nila yan
kasi they were given they were like the poster child for the World Bank, IMF, di ba? During their time, sila Pinoy, good governance. So pinautang sila, di ba? Ngayon, that's the source of this, yung statement na pag sinabi natin. So yun ang sagot. Madam Vice President, yun ang sagot. Honest to goodness, walang I'm not favoring it or one way or not. That's what the evidence says. Wala tayong magagawa. So I think we've laid the foundation now, for why federalism is better. I think we can talk about how would federalism operate now? How would it operate?
Do you want to take a 1-2 minute break? I'll just show a video while you get water or something.
Yeah. Let's do that. Because we've gone
let's get something. Okay, I'll play something here. All right.
Great.
The Philippines is a very beautiful country. Just look at the beauty that nature has given us. We also have very talented and good people. But sadly, we just have really bad systems. We have a closed economic system that favors the oligarchy and discourages investors, resulting in extremely high unemployment and forces millions of our people to look for jobs abroad, while being away from their families and loved ones for so many years. We have a unitary system that is too centralized around the capital and has resulted in too much overcrowding and extreme traffic congestion in Metro Manila, and has led to the neglect and underdevelopment of the regions, provinces, and the rest of the country. We have a lousy presidential system that has resulted in pork barrel politics, substandard and embarrassing low-quality politicians, high corruption, dynastic politics based on name recall, and celebrities using their popularity to get elected despite not being the most qualified for the job. But guess what? These systems can be changed. These lousy systems can be fixed. We just simply need to fix the flaws of the 1987 Constitution as a starting point. We need to open up to foreign direct investors so that they come in and set up factories and offices and hire Filipinos and pay them decent wages in the Philippines, so that there won't be a need to go abroad and be away from their families. We need federalism in order to respect the country's different ethnic identities, languages, and cultures, and to spread out the jobs and opportunities to the rest of the country to develop the regions and decongest the overcrowded Metro Manila. We need a parliamentary system in order to emphasize parties and platforms and lessen personality politics to improve the quality of our politicians, where competence is valued over popularity and name recall. We can do this if we really want our country to succeed. We can improve our system. Others have done it. There's absolutely no reason why we can't do it too. Support constitutional reform for a better and improved Philippines and a better future for our children and our children's children. Let's correct the Constitution now.
Okay, we're back, ladies and gentlemen. So we had and I got a little glass of water and
Yeah.
hee break.
Good.
Just kidding.
Yeah.
So all right, let's get back to the topic. So
So where were we?
We have this slide here.
Yeah. So
Emmanuel.
so we've discussed why federalism should be adopted, why it's appropriate, why it performs better. Now, how will it work? So why federalism ang sinagot natin ngayon? Paano? How? So in order, maraming technical terms na pwedeng gamitin dito, but I want to keep it simple, no? I want to keep our discussion very basic. If you were to set up a federal system, there's a famous theorem that you need to apply, which comes from Oates in 1972. It's called the decentralization theorem. It says that each public service should be provided by the jurisdiction having control over the minimum geographic area that would internalize the benefits and costs of such provision. So,
I think this is also known as the principle of subsidiarity. If I'm not mistaken, subsidiarity is also what they call it. Yeah.
Well, yeah. So this is it. Economists love using this term, internalizing the benefits and costs. Kasi kung yun nga, in order to generate what do you say? in order to ensure accountability and also to ensure that the people who pay the taxes derive the benefit, the people who foot the costs also derive the benefits. When you assign tasks and responsibilities in a federal system, it should be assigned to the geographic area, the minimum geographic area, where these benefits and costs can be internalized. No, walang spillover effect, walang ano. So a simple analogy that people like to make here is that of a cake. No, so if you want to have your cake and eat it too, right? So how would you want your cake? In a federal system, sometimes we could see it as a layered cake, no, a cake with multiple layers. Yun yung sinasabi na where each layer has a distinct set of responsibilities. So yung exclusive powers niya. At each layer of the cake, federal, regional, and local, may kanya-kanyang responsibilities. Nakadelineate yan. So layered cake ang isang analogy. But it can also be seen as a marbled cake. Diba? Marbled cake. Parang mamon na marble. Diba? Minsan yung kulay ng mamon. Parang,
yeah.
May overlap. So
may overlap.
This is where responsibilities are shared across different orders of government. So, for example, in Australia, when you get sick and you need to consult a doctor, Medicare subsidizes the cost of your consulting fees, no? Then you just pay a gap. So that is handled by the Commonwealth. You know, you swipe your card when you pay, and the check comes from the health system. That's run by the federal system. Kasi nga nationwide yun eh. Doesn't matter where you live, ganyan. But when you need to go to the hospital, so the primary care is the role of the Commonwealth, the federal government. But when you need to go to the hospital is run by the state. Kasi yun yung geographic area. It's like local lang yun. Diba? Each hospital may kanya-kanyang it serves a locality. So kaya it's better that the responsibility for handling the hospital is assigned to the state, although the states do derive funding support from the government. No, so that in a sense it's like a marbled. You could say that if primary, tertiary, yun ang ano. Pero pati yung tertiary, parang marbled na rin siya. It's shared responsibility by the federal and the state. So yun yung analogy. In reality, it's not either or. It's not we have either layered or marbled. In reality, federal systems are a combination of both. No. So ganon. And there's no perfect formula. It's just really.
That's right.
We shouldn't like. We might get it wrong, or no, let's come up with the optimal. There are different ways of splitting up the roles. And katulad ngayon, so next year, pagka dinevolve yung ilang powers, no, that might just be done on the basis of the national economic manager saying, we need to devolve that because we can't afford it. Parang ganon ba? We kick the can. We pass the buck to them. We don't want to be responsible for that. Paano kung that's just from a financial point of view. But here, the theorem operates in a more broader sense. No, it has to be rational and logical, and it has to be based on that principle. No, so my fear is that hindi pag-iisipan ng mabuti yung pag-devolve. Ang driving force lang kasi is yung deficit and yung debt. So bahala na kayo, umutang kayo, no? Kung hindi nyo kayang mag-raise ng revenue sa lalawigan ninyo, umutang na lang kayo. So kanya-kanyang banat na ngayon, di ba? So hindi sana ganun eh, hindi dapat ganun. So
may question ako, Doy.
Yeah.
For example, yung let's say education, how is that done in Australia?
So again, the schools are run by the state governments, but they do receive Commonwealth funding as well. So
Ayun.
ang funding lang it comes from the parang may IRA din kami. It comes from the value added tax. So it's part funded. So schools derive the bulk actually of their revenue, of their funding support from the federal government, and some from the state. 75-25% usually is the split. But then the teachers and principals, they're all employees of the state government. Sila yung nagpe-payroll. They pay for their salaries, and they're technically state government employees. So the bulk of the service delivery in health and education is handled at the state level, but a lot of fiscal transfers comes from the federal level. It all derived from the fact that during the war, the state ceded control over tax collection to the federal government for the income tax, and since then they've never returned it back to the states. So what happens now is that the federal government just simply transfers money to the states.
I see.
So that's how it works.
And things like so I mean, like, you have this sharing of the funding in a sense, right? Because of that. And does that also mean that things like curriculum are kind of...
So there is a state Department of Education, but then there are also standards set at what the national government tries to do is it runs the testing. They call the standards testing. So they try to maintain, they try to monitor that no state is getting left behind, and sometimes they do parang special funding support, special block grants or reward payments for states that meet a higher that's settled at the intergovernmental level. Parang nakaka-agreement sila.
Okay.
So yun, it's just subject to negotiation, really. But there are these practices established already, and by and large, that's how it's settled. No, it's settled that way. So they're not left on their own. Bahala na kayo. There is still that funding support, and they still have a say in terms of how you run it, or in terms of the outcomes that need to be achieved. And then the states determine how to implement it. May kanya-kanyang modified curriculum to suit the local culture, yung mga ganon, yung mga local indigenous, culture and history, yung mga ganon.
Okay. I'm just wondering, in the case of Australia, paano yung mga territories like the Northern Territory, which obviously cannot yet be considered self-sustaining as a state in itself? That's why it's just a territory. But how do things work there for them?
To be honest, I'm not completely across that, since I work for a state government. But my understanding naman is that they also have a chief minister there.
Yes.
So they also have their own government. It's not run by Canberra. No.
That's right.
From what I have seen in the negotiate, it's just that they're not as populous as the rest of the states. Kaya hindi pa siya nabigyan ng statehood status. Pero I think in terms of, siguro there are some powers that have not been devolved to them. But from what I've seen in the negotiations that I've participated in intergovernmentally, they're on the table. They have a seat at the table.
Yeah. They are parang adolescents. States are adults, and they are, I think, adolescents. But that's kind of like, probably that's the analogy. They're adolescents.
There's a degree of paternalism because the large bulk of their population is indigenous. So and when nagkaroon ng crisis doon sa child protection, child abuse, the federal government stepped in.
Yes.
So they were able to do that because I think territory government lang sila. Kaya ganon. Pero there's a degree of paternalism there. Really, the indigenous people should be, this is my personal view, they should be given self-governance. So the marbled and layered cake approach, one way of summarizing that is to say federalism, the simple definition of federalism is this: it's self-governance mixed with shared governance.
Yes, yes.
Self-governance with shared governance siya. Kasi yun yung marbled shared. Yun yung self, yung layered. Self with shared. That's a simple definition of federalism for those that are watching. Para maintindihan nyo. So in effect, when that happens, federal state ka na, whether you call yourself federal or not. But federal constitution will guarantee that happens. So I want to move on now in terms of, because we've already talked about the fiscal transfers. I want to go on to a more technical thing, which is how will the distribution of resources work? Kasi yun ang tanong na gustong masagot ni Vice President Lenny noon eh. Sabi niya, pabor ako dyan, pero paano nga mangyari? Kunwari, sa Bicol region, how will it work? How will you guarantee na hindi kami magpapag-iwanan? And kasi ang frame of reference nga nila is the US Constitution na competitive, kanya-kanya. You compete with each other, you undercut the other. You cut your taxes here para ma-outcompete mo siya, and then so on and so forth. Now, ang cooperative model adopts a more harmonious and more egalitarian principle, which follows the principle of fiscal equalization. So this term called fiscal equalization, the OECD, the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, which is a club of rich countries, but includes states like Korea and Mexico and Chile now. They define this as a transfer of fiscal resources across jurisdictions with the aim of offsetting differences in revenue-raising capacity or public service cost. So in some states that have a smaller tax base, their ability to raise revenue is much less compared to richer provinces and cities. So fiscal equalization tries to offset that. Some other states naman, because they have a higher proportion, like South Australia, where the population is more dispersed, we have a higher proportion of refugees. We've admitted a larger proportion of humanitarian visas. We were historically the manufacturing base, but now with manufacturing down, there's a lot higher rate of unemployment and underemployment. And as a result of this, and a higher proportion of indigenous as well, and disabilities. Because of this, delivering services is much higher per capita in our state. Mas mahal. Kasi walang economies of scale eh. Mas sparse and malawak ang area. Sparse ang population. Imbis na yung mga syudad katulad sa Sydney and Melbourne na nandun nakakoncentrate lahat ng tao within that small region. Kaya mas madaling mag-provide ng services doon. Kasi concentrated ang tao. Sa amin parang magkakalayo-layo, no? So, because of these differences, the principal objective is to allow sub-central governments to provide their citizens with similar sets of public services at a similar tax burden, even if incomes differ. So, ang ibig sabihin nito, we are able to provide the same educational and health services to our citizens here as citizens in Sydney and Melbourne. But we don't have to tax ourselves too high because cost delivery is more expensive. We don't have to raise our taxes so much in order to provide the same level. That is addressed by fiscal equalization in a cooperative federal model. Kaya hindi tama yung sinasabi na pag in-adopt ang federalism. Yes, lalong mamumulubi. Yeah. Mapapag-iwanan kayo. Like ganon, no? The rich will become... No, wala eh. It's the model, yung bayani, the concept, the term na bayanihan, constitution, that's not, that wasn't just adopted willy-nilly. It was based on the actual provisions that allowed for fiscal institutions to provide for fiscal equalization. Now, so let's get to that. What institution am I talking about? In Australia, it's known as the Commonwealth Grants Commission, or CGC. And the Commonwealth Grants Commission is tasked with coming up with a formula for how to equalize. So this is done and reviewed every year with a 3-year lag. So kunwari, the tax base from 3 years ago, they determine how that is going to be split. That is the basis for determining how it will be split 3 years down the track. And so, firstly, bakit ba nakakaroon ng diferensya ang bawat estado? There, you have it on the screen. It's because the main reasons for the differences in states is fiscal capacities are mining production. So if you have richer natural resources in your state, like Western Australia or Queensland, de syempre, mas malaki yung royalties na ambag mo doon, no? Or kung kunwari, property sales, mas mataas ang presyo ng mga bahay at lupa sa lugar nyo. De syempre, yung real property tax, mas kikita yung probinsya o yung syudad, no? Taxable payrolls, if you have a higher workforce. Remoteness, kung masyadong malawak, that could increase the cost. Indigenous status, population growth, community size, these economies of scale, natural disasters, and employee costs. So all of these play a factor in terms of determining the cost of delivering services and the degree to which you're able to raise revenue in a jurisdiction. Ganyan. And then, so, kunwari, so, acknowledging the fact na makakaiba nga yung fiscal capacity ng bawat region, how do you settle it? How do you equalize it? The next slide explains how. So, the CGC says, what they do is they collect data on how much it costs states to provide these services. So bawat state, they see how much does it really cost to deliver health, education, roads, transport, ganyan. And from those data, it is able to derive an average standard of service across Australia. So this is how much the average cost is to deliver per head of population, per student, how much it costs across the country. And then the commission looks at the fiscal capacity of each state. So can it fund that cost? Or usually kasi, kung yan ang cost, yan lang yung ability to fund. Pag hinati mo yung revenue by head, yan lang. And so it identifies the funding shortfall that each state has between the capacity and the requirements to be able to provide the same standard. And so, ang kinalalabasan nito is that a state such as mine, so when they split up the equivalent of the IRA, so for example, we call it the the goods and services tax. Kung kunwari, pag hinati mo across Australia yung revenue dyan, and it's $100 per head of population. South Australia, because mas malaki yung cost per head and mas maliit yung tax revenue capacity niya, it receives a differential of, like yung mga hazardous pay, yung mga ganon.
Yes,
receive a differential kapag so ito, may differential kami because we're disadvantaged. So imbis na 100 per capita on average, we receive, this is the actual rate, a differential of 0.35. So manahin mo yun, we receive about a third more than the average to deal with the gap that we have from our weaker fiscal capacity and our higher cost. Yun ang that offsets it. Now, some would say, diba, ang gagawin nyo na lang is lalakihan nyo yung shortfall. Purposefully, you cut your taxes para lalabas, i-offset ng, hindi. What they do is they look at what, they don't actually tell state governments, this is how you should be taxing or this is how you should be spending. They try to create a profile. They average it out. So if you suddenly change the policy, they're just going to use it on the average settings across Australia. Hindi mo pwedeng i-game o dayain yung sistema. No? Now, So that's how it works. Whereas, let's say, New South Wales, which is a richer, because that's where Sydney is, the eastern seaboard states, this is the actual ratio that they get from the CGC website. It's 0.918. So they only receive $92.
Ay, teka. Tama ba to? Wait.
No, you just stay on the same slide.
I just
So
say
they just
same slide again.
they receive the same amount. They receive 0.92 per head of population. So mas mababang. So yun yung fiscal equalization na kung tawagin. So that the richer provinces don't run away from the poorer provinces. And
or the poorer provinces don't get left behind.
We don't get left behind. We can provide the same standard of service. So, isipin mo, now in the Philippines, the proposal was to set up a National Finance Commission. That was in the provision of the Federal Institute Study Group and the Bayanihan Constitution. This NFC was going to determine itong sinasabi kong fiscal equalization formula. Hindi yung IRA ngayon kung saan may mga pwedeng perverse outcomes ngayon eh, no? So siya yung fiscal institution na siya yung gagawa nun. And imaginein mo, because they were getting advice from various foreign governments on how to do this. The EU does this, by the way, as well. So may model na eh, na pwedeng sundan eh. So they could devise a more responsive formula to equalize compared to what the era does now, where Metro Manila, and that is my next slide. Metro Manila, this is my modeled outcome. Ano? This is quite a complicated slide. Pero pagtuunan nyo lang ng pansin, this is my own estimate based on public pronouncements, based on what the DBM, Department of Finance, Philippine Statistical Authority have, the public and the Philippine Institute for Development Studies. Next year, this could happen, where under the current IRA, Metro Manila will have a fiscal surplus from after they receive billions from the era, simply because they have a higher population, than the rest of the country, and Southern Tagalog, Region 4A, could also see the same. Whereas provinces, regions from the Visayas and Mindanao, you can see the deficit. That's column E, column E.
Yeah.
The fiscal gap will actually be quite big in those, potentially quite big. Now, I was actually quite conservative in determining column A, where I modulated the growth, because these regions, the underdeveloped ones, their expenses have been growing at a faster clip than Metro Manila. But I just took the average growth for the entire country of something like 9%, 9.6%. It's actually double digits in these regions in the last 4 years. I applied, and then NCR, which was growing at a slower rate, I projected a faster growth because they will be responsible for the COVID response. And then they will be assigned additional expenditures, 234 billion. So dinagdag ko yun. But then the revenue, according to the Bureau of Local Government Finance, is going to be slashed almost in half next year to 160 billion from the 300 billion original projection. So what that will do is cause really a big deficit. And the IRA, even though it's the new Supreme Court Mandanas Garcia petition ruling already that will be imposed, still not going to be enough. So we really need to think through this scenario, because this is not a just outcome. Masaya si Mandanas kasi nasa Batangas siya.
Batangas, Southern Tagalog, 4A.
Masaya siya. Or kung ikaw si Garcia, nasa Bataan ka, medyo maliit-liit lang yung deficit nila sa region.
Oo nga.
NCR ka, masaya ka. Pero paano ka kung nasa Davao region na? Paano ka na nun?
Samar,
edi,
kawawa eh.
mababaon kayo sa utang or you will cut the services. So,
Yeah.
so yung sinasabing fiscal equalization so that everybody receives the same level of service, hindi yan mapapatupad. Lalo lang grabe sa tingin ko. So,
Under this current system that we have.
under the current system. So,
Oo.
so anong mangyayari? Lilipat ang mga residente saan?
Metro Manila.
Metro Manila na naman! Or sa Cebu.
Actually, look at this, Doy, no? If we, kung titingnan natin itong graph, no? So, itong chart na to. So, makita natin, in terms of, so population and own revenues, kind of, they're kind of similar. Although, okay, very clear na yung size of population, for example, ng 4A ay hindi nalalayo dito sa NCR.
No.
Pero when you look at own revenues, ang laki-laki ng NCR. And that's because nandun yung mga trabaho. That's where all the companies are setting up. So all these, mga offices and factories, whatever.
So 4A receives 124 billion in IRA. That's the projection for next year. Column D. And NCR will receive 67 billion. Kasi the formula is 50% population, 25% land mass, and 25% shared, equal sharing. Yun yung formula eh. Pero ngayon, yung 50%, so yung cities will derive 23% and provinces will derive 23%. So, but Metro Manila only relies, its dependence on IRA is only, it derives 20% of its revenues from
IRA.
Previously.
Kasi it's able to, meron naman siyang own revenues kasi niya.
Yes.
Diba?
Ngayon, nakikita mo, parang magiging equal sila. Pero dati kasi, hindi ganun kalaki yung IRA na natatanggap nila.
Oo. Now, here's the thing I wanted to show to the, to talk about to the viewers, to our viewers. Yung so lumalabas, NCR, own revenues niya 72, ito. Tapos yung Region 3, 14. Tapos yung 4A, 4A, 24. So ito yung mga top 3 regions. Ngayon, if we really look at it, 4A and 3 in many ways are actually the result of spillover from NCR.
Yes.
From NCR.
Extension.
So kumbaga, extension lang sila. So especially
Manila
4A.
area.
Yeah, especially 4A because 4A includes Rizal. Rizal, where you have just outside of Pasig. Just outside of Pasig, you have Cainta and Taytay and all these and Antipolo, which are practically parts of Metro Manila. They're pretty much the areas that are where people who work in Metro Manila actually live.
Yes.
Or they have sometimes they have their factories there. And then ganun nga sa Laguna, Santa Rosa, yung mga factories ay nandun din sa southern part. Yung pag sinabi nating south, yun yung 4A. So nandun yung mga pabrika ng mga kumpanyang ang kanilang opisina ay nasa Metro Manila. Diba? So yun yung lumalabas. It's just all about spillover from...
So mas mahal ang lupa doon. Industrial na kasi. Commercial industrial na yan eh. Some say even San Fernando, Pampanga is, part
it's
of Greater Manila area.
Yes. Actually, there was an ADB study. An ADB study showed that the Greater Manila area, the conglomeration of Metro Manila, basically extends all the way to Baliwag. And in fact, ang Clark area is like, in a way, parang part na rin.
Parang satellite city.
Satellite.
Lalo na pag natapos yung rail, yung fast rail.
Yes.
Diba? Lalo na, magiging parang, parang Imperial Manila na talaga. Parang, parang London na. Yeah, ganun talaga. And, so, isipin nyo, pag dinevolve ngayon yung build program. Pag next year kasi, i-devolve nila yan eh. Part of it is road construction. So, ang mangyayari, yung pera na ibibigay ng IRA, yan lang ang parang magiging panakip butas dun sa deficit nila eh. Kasi na-slash yung revenue projection. So, ang
Grabe.
mangyayari niyan, mapopostpone lahat ng mga proyektong yan. Believe me, yung build na napakagandang programa sana to disperse development across the country. I think this will be the death knell for it. And so ang makakapag-invest lang sa infrastructure will be the richer regions like NCR, 4A, and Region 3. Yun lang.
That's actually why kami sa Correct Movement, we're really so emphatic on, kumbaga, if you're going to do federalism, we also really desperately need to get rid of those 60-40 and other anti-foreign direct investment restrictions. Kasi right now, everything that we're doing is just rearranging the furniture inside the house. Whereas what we want to do is to bring in more revenues to come in. Kumbaga parang, hindi lang yung change mo yung saan yung
the deck chairs on the Titanic.
Oo. What we want is to really fix the situation para dumami talaga ang mga trabaho all around the country. That's why we need those.
I'll have a lot to say on the origins of the restrictions siguro next time. Pero
yeah, let's have another one next time.
Yun nga eh, yung ito ang nakikita kong fiscal train wreck that I alluded to at the start.
Oo.
Na yung finance managers natin, ang iniisip lang nila is to maintain credit rating eh. So, ita-download nila yan sa mga probinsya. And as we said, wala nang kapasidad yung mga probinsya na yan na to raise revenues. So, I see a lot of problems ahead, which will, unfortunately, we'll have to pass it on to the next administration. So sana, before that happens, kung pwede sana, no, one of the options that they raised was i-pause muna natin to. I-suspend muna natin yung some of the, and the thing is, once napairal na yung Supreme Court ruling, mahirap nang bawiin yun eh, to engage in fiscal equalization. Hindi na papayag yung mga matatanyag na region eh, na maliliitan yung share nila to spread to give, to empower and capacitate the weaker ones. Pag umiral na yon, mahirap nang bawiin. So what you will have to do is raise revenue somewhere else. Now, to address, now this might be just a problem next year because of the recession that has happened, because as I said, the revenue was slashed by almost half. So we would have about 150 billion extra sana if not for COVID. So that could have dealt with the column E fiscal gap quite a bit. But then to deal with the rest is, there were proposals by the Philippine Institute for Development Studies, or just a schema drawn up, to assign motor vehicle registration down to the regional level. So you could actually, in our case in Australia, ganun eh, motor vehicle registration is this one source of revenue for the states. Another is yung mga land sales, yung stamp duty. Pag bumili ka ng lupa or properties, stamp duty, yung primary source, and also a payroll tax. But the proposal from PIDS was that payroll tax could be deducted from the personal income tax. So under a federal model, the central government could devolve those functions down at the state or regional level. And so that could help support this. And then apart from that, of course, are the royalties, like in BARM. Yung BARM na may deficit na 129 billion, that's actually half of the fiscal gap, that's already in part settled because there's 100 billion automatic transfers from the national government already. That's not taken into account yet here. So magkakaroon sila ng kasi tinan mo naman yung own source of revenue nila, 171 million lang as of now.
Grabe.
That will change, gradually change kasi may royalties na sila, ganyan.
Actually, that's one of the reasons why we really, they desperately need yung 60-40 na yan tanggalin. Because
Oo.
BARM being a majority Muslim, predominantly Muslim region, maraming mga other countries or companies, investors galing sa mga Muslim majority
Yes,
countries
yes.
na gustong tumulong sa
UAE,
kanila. Kasi I mean,
Gulf.
the fellow
Yeah.
brotherhood of the in the Ummah ganyan. So gusto nilang
Mm.
tulungan ng kanilang kapwa Muslim. And
Mm.
they're willing to go into the BARM and
Yes.
invest.
Yes.
Problema, constitutionally, yun nga, yung 60-40 nandyan pa rin. So wala, unless we
Oo.
remove that, yung BARM kawawa.
Pero
So
mabuti na rin, oo. Mabuti na rin nabanggit mo yung BARM kasi I think people don't realize this, that because of the passage of the Bangsa Autonomous Region of Muslim Mindanao law, that we are actually living in a federal system already.
we're already very much
De
similar
facto.
to it. Yeah.
The
They
only
are
thing
our
is that
test bed.
it's an asymmetric
Asymmetric, yes.
federalism, like in Britain, where you have Scotland with its own assembly, Northern Ireland with
Northern
its
Ireland,
own
Wales
parliament.
also. Yeah.
Wales wants its own.
Well,
Pero,
Wales already has actually.
do they?
Wales
Do they?
already has. They already have. They already
Good.
have.
So, ganon.
England lang yung wala pa.
England lang wala. England
Oh,
wala.
England lang wala.
So, parang sa Argentina, ganon din ata eh. It's like an asymmetric. So whether we like it or not, parang de facto federal model na tayo. And it could be implemented sa CAR next, Cordillera Administrative Region. It can become the autonomous na rin, like in BARM. That would be the next. And yung BARM is parliamentary in nature. They have
Yes, they are parliamentary.
yeah.
Yes.
So, but to expand this beyond the two regions, because there are provisions in our current constitution that allow this. To expand that, we need constitutional amendments. And one way of doing that, in my next slide, is just to simply add a few words in Article 10, local government. Yan lang kailangan gawin. I know that you at Correct are advocating a new CONCON and,
Yes.
Pero kasi yung urgency nito yung fiscal train wreck is heading our way eh.
Yeah.
So sa akin, isuspend lang muna natin sana yung Supreme Court by amending the local government code. And then Congress could vote on this just simple surgical change. Kasi yun ang gusto ko doon sa Federal Institute eh. They didn't jump the whole concept. They did line by line. And this could actually allow for regional organic acts for a regional government code to be enacted, like the local government code, which would create set the scene for regional governments already. So the RDCs would have an electoral mandate. The regional development councils. Actually, the phase one was to create a regional commission, which is basically the RDC. It's already existing. The RDC. There is staff there. There's positions already. The salaries of the governors. But then you could create a transition period so that that then eventually becomes like the BARM. We'll have a regional assembly.
Actually, I wanted to explain na rin yung parang the situation in the Philippines now, we only have autonomous regions allowed for Muslim Mindanao and the Cordilleras, and the other regions are not given that ability to form autonomous regions and regions with basically similar to the BARM government, BARM level government that is elected and has the power and the funding. Parang they had the same issue as well in Spain before. So Spain, before it was always parang Pilipinas lang, always looking only at two special regions, the Basque country, the Basque region, and Catalonia. Only those two. So parang sa atin, Muslim Mindanao and Cordilleras. And when they were formulating the 1978 Constitution, that has created what is essentially a federation in all but name in Spain.
Yes.
Yung parang during those deliberations, nagkaroon ng parang idea na bakit sila lang? Bakit kami hindi? So, gumanon yung mga Galician, yung mga yung mga Gallego.
Natural lang, di ba? Bakit
Bakit
ano
sila
kami?
lang? Ba't kami? Ba't kami wala? Tapos ganun din yung
Catalonia
mga
is one of
Andalus.
the richer regions now.
Oo. Yung mga
Uh,
Andalusian sa southern Spain, gumanon din sila. Bakit sila lang din? O bakit kami hindi?
and that created the Spanish miracle in the 70s.
Yes,
that led to it's a bit controversial because they had Franco leading it, no? But still, it Spain became, it was backward before that time.
It was backward, very backward before.
Yeah.
And then the Spanish miracle happened because Franco was forced by circumstances. They were not doing very well, and linapitan siya ng mga ibang Opus Dei na mga pro economic liberalization na Opus Dei economists. Sinabihan siya, alam mo, you know what? But hindi kaya natin
parang
gayahin yung mga...
Villegas,
Bernie Villegas, yung ganun tipo. Sinabihan siya na, why not allow foreign investors to come in? Open it up. Bring in investors para pumasok yung mga yan, para magkaroon ng trabaho yung mga tao. And that's why they became the Spanish miracle.
Yeah.
Nagkaroon sila niyan.
And which is why a lot of Latin American countries, when they saw that, sinabi nila, uy, why don't we shift to a parliamentary system? A lot of them are federal na pero sabi nila, let's adopt the model in Spain. Sabi nila.
I was gonna say, anyway, when Franco died, Franco died, and then they thought that they needed now to set up a new constitution kasi hindi na talaga pwede yung one-man rule na nangyari doon. They were now thinking of, let's now go back to some of the principles that were set up in the original Spanish Republic, but let's continue on as a monarchy. So it was a compromise between the left and the right. So the right, who were in power, who were in charge because of Franco, and then the left, who basically they said, we're also part of Spain. And nag-agree na rin yung mga rightists doon, yung mga Frankista.
It's a compromise,
Compromise siya. So let's come up with a new system where we become more democratic and somewhat retain some of the stabilizing features of the old system. So sabi nila, we need to do federation, like parang federalism, but sige, to appease the rightists, kasi the right wing don't like the term federalism. Para tayong federalism pero hindi natin tatawaging federalism. And kasi originally talaga it's only supposed to be for Basque region and Catalonia. And then during the deliberation sinabi nila, ¿por qué no tenemos café para todos? Why can't we have coffee for all? Kumbaga, bakit sila lang ang bibigyan nyo ng kape? Kami hindi. So, café para todos, coffee for all became the slogan kung bakit nagkaroon sila nung autonomous regions all around. So, hindi lang Basque region, hindi lang Catalonia, pero kasama na rin ang Galicia, Asturias, yung Cantabria, Castilla-Leon, Castilla-La Mancha.
These were separate kingdoms once upon a time.
Andalusia, ayun. So nagkaroon sila ng ibang other regions na rin.
With their distinct culture and even their distinct languages,
Yes, distinct languages.
Now, there's been a lot of unrest in Catalonia of late, and the Basque thing hasn't really been completely settled. Parang tayo rin yan eh. Like with the Barm. There's a history of conflict. So let's see. All eyes are on the Barm, and if that succeeds in transitioning to a post-conflict scenario where they actually see their improvements in their life, in their way of life, while recognizing their identity. Other regions, I believe, will start to hanker for that side. Pero my problem is there's no more time eh. The fiscal train wreck is there. So I'm torn.
That's the problem talaga.
Yeah. So
that's the problem. Kasi
ang tagal-tagal.
Ang bagal-bagal kasi ng mga Pilipino. Honestly, a lot of these problems should have been solved long ago. But it's like meron kang kotse na nakakaamoy ka na parang may mabaho sa aircon . Ay, mukhang may daga sigurong namatay na nandyan sa loob. Tapos, wag na lang muna ayusin yan. Tapos parang it's like everybody who's driving the same car says the same thing. baho-baho, ayusin na nga natin to. Pero wag na lang muna, wag na lang. Yun yung nangyari sa atin. It's like, actually, 1992 pa lang, kasi di ba 1987 Constitution, 1992 pa lang, dumating na bumisita si Lee Kuan Yew, just 5 years after the ratification of the 1987 Constitution. He gave his famous speech in November 1992 in front of the Philippine Business Conference. And he actually criticized our Constitution. He talked about us being very, very restrictive against foreign investors. He talked about our lousy use of the presidential system of the US. Parang sabi niya, bulok ang US system. One of the hardest systems to use yan. And then he also talked about why everything is in Metro Manila. Napag-usapan na niya yan as early as 1992. What's the only thing that people remember from that speech? They remember only when he said, "Na I don't think that democracy is very important for development. I'd say discipline is more important." Yun lang ang naalala ng mga Pilipino. But actually, very important stuff that he talked about was you need to bring in more investors, more foreign investors, open up. You need to devolve away from Metro Manila only, and you need to shift away from that presidential system, that lousy American-style presidential system you have. He talked about that. And it's already, 2021? And we still haven't fixed that constitution yet. Even though as early as 5 years after, Lee Kuan Yew, who had already proven he was capable of going from third world to first, was talking about the flaws of our system. Ay, nako. Tagal-tagal na, hindi pa rin naaayos, di ba?
Yes, oo nga. Ay, nako, talaga. Yun ang problema sa atin is we just leave it to chance, to fate. Bahala na. And then, nagugulat tayo when a strong man comes in and tries to rectify the situation. Because it becomes very unwieldy, very difficult. Like yung analogy, let's go back to the analogies. We're a large republic now. We have grown in size. From 6 million, nung time ng 1902, panahon ng mga Kano, we have grown how many times? Sobrang, more than 10 times. Close to 20 times na in a few years. Will be 20 times what our population was when the original constitution under the Americans was formulated, which is like what our current constitution is patterned after. So, meaning to say, we've outgrown it already. We've outgrown it. So parang we're still trying to fit into our little boy pants. We need to put on our big boy pants now because we've grown up. And the way to do that is to change our constitution and come up with adopt a more appropriate model, which is, as I said, the cooperative federal model. No?
Indeed, indeed.
So yun lang nakikita ko and so ang daming mga misconceptions, ang daming mga misconstruals. I hope that somehow we've addressed some of them today with our discussion.
Oh, I'm sure we have, And I can see some of the comments. May mga nagsabi na, we actually tried fixing nung time ni GMA, and well, we've several times. Actually, I believe
We've come close.
Time ni Ramos, I think Ramos himself, he tried to do the constitutional reform thing as a result of that speech by Lee Kuan Yew.
Yes.
And although he didn't do it immediately, but he tried to do it in the middle of his term. And of course, naglabasan yung mga fake news ng mga term extensions ang gusto, term extensions, and they kept on saying it. Tas siniraan nila.
Paano nila yung FDI naman ang pinag-usapan?
FDI,
economic provisions.
Time ni FDI yung kay ERAP, he wanted yung Concord ang tawag doon, Constitutional Correction for Development. He wanted to bring in foreign investors, allow them to
surprisingly, he was supposed to be a populist president, pero after the Asian financial crisis, he chided Mahathir for imposing capital controls in ASEAN, and he was trying to open up the economy to foreign investments.
Actually, I honestly, I'll be honest. I think ERAP. I wasn't pro ERAP, and I didn't like pro ERAP at all, and until now I still have my issues with him. But actually, I honestly think now, looking back, Erap was probably hinanapan ng butas, siniraan siya to be ousted because of his push for Concord. I really think, it was because he was pushing for constitutional reform that would allow foreign investors to easily come in, tanggalin yung 60-40, na inano siya ng mga oligarch na parang siniraan siya, and that's why he was hinanapan ng butas.
That was part of it. I mean, may sariling responsibility, may sariling pananagutan din naman yung dating Pangulo natin. He did get involved.
May gambling issues din siya.
Gambling issues. But that was used as the trigger. Pero sino yung pumunta? Sino yung dumalo sa EDSA 2? It was primarily like middle class and
the oligarchs din.
Ang pumondo ron. Kaya, and takot siguro sila. Kasi yung era para sa mahirap din eh. It was a pro-poor agenda. He wanted to improve, give more job opportunities, and PDP Laban was actually allied with
that's
part of the LAMP coalition. You remember?
LAMP, yes, indeed.
So yun, si Nene Pimentel was Senate President. Yun nga lang, on that issue of integrity, he really couldn't abide by it anymore. Pero that was part of the mix. That was part of the mix in terms of why ERAP, the business community felt he had to go. They were afraid of some of his statements, some of the pushes that he was going for. So that was part of the reason why they ousted him.
So it's just sad, no? Kasi every attempt to fix the constitution is always being demonized by the oligarchy who own Philippine mass media. And so you have yun, time ni FVR, time ni ERAP, time ni GMA. And then even when some of the people who were allied with the Liberal Party under Noynoy were trying to go against Noynoy, because Noynoy didn't want to make changes to his mommy's constitution. But there were several people like Sina Belmonte and Salceda who were at that point in time part of the Liberal Party, and they were strongly pushing for the removal of the 60-40. The removal of the anti-competitive restrictions.
But kasi rin naman the 88 Constitution or
87 Constitution.
May mga booby traps in terms of how to amend it.
Yun nga eh.
So yun yung stumbling block lagi, which I think na they've finally sorted out.
They've sorted it out now recently.
Look, ang BARM, ganyan din ang nangyari noon eh. There were so many attempts previously. Every government tried to deal with the question. And every party that took office attempted to. At first, the Liberal Party under GMA was opposed to it. Ayaw ma-chop-chop. But when they assumed office, they realized kailangan talagang i-push. Ang problema, naging unconstitutional yung version nila. So it came to the point that every political party had a go, opposed it, and then realized that it was the solution in the end. Yeah. So kaya na ipasa yung BARM law, BARM Act, the Organic Act. Kasi eventually everybody came around. So perhaps that might this is more fundamental than that. So it's more challenging. But I think they're working through the issues one by one. One is the mode of changing it. And so this is gonna be devilish. Pero if you ask me, one of the urgencies is simply because of what we're facing now, the pandemic and the recovery. And the model that we have isn't going to make things very equitable. So I am very afraid of what will happen next year. And I'm not very hopeful that our technocrats alone can solve the issue. So it will require, maybe when they finally see how it eventually might get mismanaged, like not all LGUs will have the capacity, will not be ready, then maybe we'll start to think again. But so from my point of view, if we're going to push for these reforms, we have to follow the playbook of the train law enactment. Kasi
Yeah, yeah.
what they did was they pushed for it in the early part of the term. Nung mabango pa yung, like when may momentum pa.
Mm.
And so they finally bedded it down before the midterms. Kasi after the midterms, dumadaan na tayo sa lame duckness and,
lame duck
parang
na.
ganun eh. So the window, it will be in the next 2 to 3 years. Kasi sayang yung federalism it was being tackled at the same time of train. And we needed to get our fiscal house in order. Yun na muna ang naging naipasa along with some other measures that allowed universal education and healthcare. Pero naudlot yung federalism, and one of the reasons why was because the ruling party, they just couldn't figure out the way forward.
Yeah, part of the problem actually. So I'm kind of privy to what happened. No, when the Concom draft, kasi the Bayanihan draft that the team of the Concom, headed by former Chief Justice Puno, what they came up with kasi was heavily criticized by the economic secretaries. So Bangko Sentral, NEDA, Finance, lahat, they basically, they said, bakit hindi nyo tinanggal yung 60-40? Bakit nandyan pa rin yan? Tapos, they also had issues with some of the certain things that we're talking about, how things would be allocated.
They were worried about the debt and deficit also.
So, and most especially because they did not remove that 60-40 thing. And Peter Wallace and several people in the business community were also complaining, but hindi tinanggal yung 60-40 na yan? Because that would have been the engine for more revenue that could fund the federalist push. So parang, we're just going to be working with the same amounts of funds that we have. Yun yung nangyari eh. Parang we should add in more funds, bring in the investors in. Hindi nyo tinanggal yung 60-40. So nagkaroon ng ganyan. And that's why, because of the criticisms of the CONCOM draft of 2018 by the economic cluster, President Duterte basically put a pause button on the Federalist draft and asked that the DILG spearhead an interagency task force. So that interagency task force was set up to try to fix that CONCOM draft. And I actually got invited to help out with it. So in May of 2019, I helped out. I was in Tagaytay to help with a 3-day workshop. And what transpired was we ended up actually setting up the PDP Laban draft as the alternative. Basically, sinabi namin, let's just retweak the CONCOM draft. We went back to the original
Federal Institute.
That particular one, which I was already involved with anyway.
Even before that, you say that was 2019.
2019, yeah.
Prior to the midterm election kasi, Speaker Alvarez came out and said, we can just convene as a constituent assembly and then cancel the elections of 2019. Doon na talaga nagka-loko-loko eh.
Yeah, nagkaroon pa ng ganyan problema.
In-unseat tuloy siya. It was reckless and irresponsible statements and now he's left the party, as my understanding. He's joined a different party. So they really didn't have a game plan on how, sayang kasi they controlled both houses of Congress and Malacanang. They could have really done it in the first half of Duterte's term, but because I don't know, there was no coordination.
This is, I think, one of the biggest problems of the Philippines. The party system is so fragmented that you will have, for example, right now, you will have people like Bato de la Rosa saying, let's get rid of the 60-40. And then you're going to hear some people like Joy Belmonte, who's also PDP Laban, saying, ay, hindi, wag muna ngayon kasi COVID. Yes. But Bato is saying, kaya nga, dahil nga sa COVID, kailangan natin baguhin yan
party,
eh. Kasi, diba? Walang party cohesion. Platform. And then even Coco Pimentel also starts saying, next time na lang yan. What?
It's quite erratic and
erratic. And then the president says, let's do it now. Parang, ano ba? You're
Tapos
supposed to
sabi
be
pa ni
united.
Alvarez, I can actually impeach Duterte if I wanted to. Pero joke lang daw. Pero yun nga eh. And then, but even Sara Duterte, remember, she said she was opposed to it
Opposed to federalism.
because magkakaroon daw ng mini fiefdoms daw.
Yun nga eh, isa pa yan. Hindi rin niya naintindihan. So it's really very fragmented. Sobrang fragmented talaga. Even within the same family, di sila nagkakaintindihan. Ay, nako.
So, it's
very
really
disappointing.
up to us, right?
We're here really doing this in order to educate as many people as possible. Make sure this reaches Sara Duterte so that she understands na mali yung kanyang mga sinasabi about federalism. Mali yung kanyang pagkaintindi. And here's a real expert. Ito si Doy. Guys, ladies and gentlemen, si Doy, he works in a country that uses federal parliamentary and is open to foreign investors. Parang this, we can use Doy's knowledge and wisdom based on that, no, so that we can gain insights. Kasi ang dami sa mga Pilipino, di nakalabas ng bansa, hindi exposed sa ano nangyayari sa ibang bansa. Kaya lagi na lang yung fake news na kinakalat ng mga munsod. Actually, ito si Christian Munsod, yung nagpakalat ng fiefdoms and federalism will cause more warlords and dynasties. Siya yung nag-imbento niyan. Tapos si Sara Duterte thinking that magiging worse yung warlords and dynasties, nakukuha niya lang yan sa paulit-ulit na sinasabi ng mga Monsod.
Yeah. Full disclosure, I went to high school with Ian Monsod, Sana. Sorry. But it's nothing personal. But pero yun nga it's a misconception and hopefully we've dispelled some of those today. So again, just going back to the three main points that we started out with. Number one, federal constitutions are more appropriate for large, diverse nations such as ours, especially to preserve the unity and to make government more directly accountable. Pangalawa, a federal constitution is needed now because it will clarify the roles and responsibilities of each level of government and allow us to design better fiscal institutions so that we can manage the devolution of powers that's happening now with the Supreme Court decision. I don't really have a slide for this, right? And then lastly, a cooperative federal model will capacitate weaker regions and allow them to level up through fiscal equalization to be able to compete with the stronger ones. And given the fact that under a federal model as well, you can also have, kasi yung mga IRA, yung mga fiscal equalization, untied yun eh. So they're not saying you should spend it on these things. They're not saying how much you should spend. It's up to the local, regional
discretion nila yun.
Because they're accountable to their own people. They're just saying, based on the averages, this is what on average it should be to be at the same level. Now, bahala ka na if you provide the services or not. You're accountable to your own electorates. But those are untied, unconditional, non-contingent. But there are also contingent special purpose payments, yung mga tinatawag na block grants sa states. Dito we call it special purpose payments. Ito yung parang reward payments for meeting the same standards that are subject to intergovernmental agreements. The closest thing we have is the DILG's seal of good housekeeping, fiscal housekeeping, na pinasulong ni Secretary Jesse Robredo pero hindi niya ma-implement nung panahon niya fully kasi hindi sila magka-agree ni President Noynoy. Under President Duterte, ininstitutionalize yon with a bill sponsored by Senator Angara in the Senate when he was local government chair. So ngayon, ironically, hindi pinikap ni Vice President Leni Robredo to eh. Her chief espoused, yung kanyang, yung kanyang chinelas, parang na-drop eh. Parang hindi na niya hindi niya pinush-through yung vision ng kanyang late husband.
Oo nga.
So it was left to President Duterte. Siya yung nagpatupad noon eh. So ang nangyayari, if a city has the seal, it can get additional funding as a reward payment. So pwede rin yun under a federal system. We have the COAG, the Council of Australia Governments. This is another institution that was proposed or patterned after under the federal Bayanihan one, where they said there will be a Council of Regional Governments and the Philippine national and regional governments. That's sort of like what that we have here.
Council of Australian Governments.
Where we have the PM and the Premier sitting and their chief ministers, ganyan. We hammer out these details so that, and I've been part of some of those negotiations in the past where we hammered out these national targets. If you hit the target, you get a bonus payment. Yun is conditional naman yun. Tied. So that happens because we have a cooperative federal model. So as I said, the cooperative one is the more appropriate for us
for the Philippines. Yes.
And it will capacitate the weaker regions and allow them to level up with the richer ones.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I just wanted to add, no? So, di ba you were asking about bakit parang naudlot yung sa federalism, no? So, yeah, so I was saying that we were doing that 2019 thing to fix the draft of the CONCOM
and the omissions.
The commissions. Yeah.
The
omissions of the commission. Yeah.
60-40.
Yun. So ang nangyari doon, the end result was that the draft that we ended up with in that workshop was actually very similar. It was the starting point was the 2018 CONCOM, but we ended up bringing it back to look like very similar to the PDP Laban. The PDP Laban na semi-presidential moving towards parliamentary. Tapos yung federalism niya based on that. Tapos and then tanggal yung 60-40. Now that was now being rebranded, and it was rebranded by the DILG partly because of my suggestion, because I told them, oh, wag nyong gamitin yung word na charter change kasi gagawin na naman nilang tsa yan. So use the word constitutional reform. Tanong nila, ano yung pwedeng magandang term? Sabi ko, ako ginagamit ko na correct eh. So kung gusto nyo, gamitin nyo core, C-O-R-E. And in the end, they created the core movement. Yeah.
Kasi si Malaya, the head of the study group, is in DILG, right?
Yes.
Anong first name? Ed Malaya.
Jonathan Malaya. Yeah, he's my friend. No? So I work closely with him also, and he was there also at that workshop.
Sayang,
yun nga eh. So we were pushing for that, and the rebranding was done. It became the core movement, and it was going to be rolled out 2020. Problem is COVID came.
Yes.
Ayan,
tinamaan ng COVID. It dropped everything. But the problem is, COVID is now going to come back and bite us. That's going to come back and bite us. Because as I said, next year, the Mandanas Garcia petition ruling is now going to come into a full implementation. And under the unitary setup, I think it's going to be chaos. It's going to be... As the LGUs are trying to deal with contact tracing and all of this stuff, here comes all of these assignments of additional responsibilities, and the distribution of the era is going to favor the richer regions.
Now this is why the League of Municipalities in the Philippines, headed by Chavit Singson, they are all pushing for constitutional reform. They want to get rid of 60-40 na. Tanggalin na natin 60-40 na yan. Kasi kaming mga bayan, kasi bayan lang sila, di ba? We're not cities. We need to find ways to bring in investors. So we will take anything. We'll bring in as many companies that we can bring in from outside the country. So tanggalin nyo muna yung 60-40 na yan. Otherwise kawawa kami. Kasi wala na kaming era.
It can be dealt with. It can be dealt with another surgical amendment to the Constitution, like what I did earlier. I just crossing out. It can be done, and then the powers can be delegated to either Congress, or what I would be in favor of is even like just a national commission that will decide that from time to time. Kasi mahirap pa yung law. So I think either way, that can be done surgically, just as the Federalist can be done. But yung ruling I think it has to be suspended for a while so that we can figure out who does what. Who does what, and it has to be done at a more at a pace na hindi tayo masyadong rushed. Kasi ngayon, rush lahat eh.
Oo nga eh.
And hindi pa talaga tayo, hindi natin alam for sure kung kayang gampanan ng mga LGU. Yung
Fiscally, we don't have the funding to be able to do this properly. Maraming mawawalan ng funds.
Or,
maraming.
Kasi yung revenue source din, yung parang, if you want to devolve yung motor vehicle, para makatulong din yun. Yung road users tax, yung mga ganon, some of those can be devolved na along with the responsibilities eh. But this has to be done deliberately and carefully planned out. Hindi yung all of a sudden, ganun na, executive order or whatever. Like, it has to be really done carefully, or else we might be faced with the same scenario that we faced in 92 when the original local government code was implemented. And, so...
Naghahabol ng funds ngayon yung government. That's what happened.
And this is the sleeper issue that I can see in 2022, which hasn't gotten a lot of coverage, isn't really talked about. You don't, except for like the business page where you'll hear Dominguez say something or whatever. Hindi siya napapag-usapan na pagtutuunan ng pansin, pero ito ang talagang pwedeng mag-upset dito sa ating recovery process next year and the years to come.
Grabe. Well, okay. So I just wanted to check with you, Doy. Do you have any parting words? Wow, we've been like 2 hours and 37 minutes.
Almost the same as last. Well, I kind of already mentioned, those are the three main insights that I'd like to leave you with. Federal system is appropriate for us due to our size and diversity. Federal system is appropriate. Federal system is needed now to clarify the roles and responsibilities and to make sure the design of the fiscal equalization is properly done. And cooperative federalism is needed to capacitate the less strong regions, to let them level up. So if we want that kind of federalism, if we want that kind of development model, we should all be pushing for it and really campaigning for it right now, because the urgency of now, because some say, we can deal with that later. But really, the reality is we have to deal with it now, because the fiscal demands of COVID and the new ruling of the Supreme Court is so. Using IRA as a cudgel to force us to decentralize can be one way of forcing the issue of federalism. But look, we're going to have to deal with it one way or another. And the other thing as well is when the BARM law, if that experiment succeeds, other regions are going to be clamoring for it. So I see this as a continuing issue that will continue to be there, and there will still be proponents even after Duterte leaves. So let's so it's one of those things that should be top of mind. Hindi lang natin good to have or nice to have once. Kasi I hear people say, kapag mayaman na tayo, kapag hindi na tayo corrupt, that's when we can apply the parliamentary federal model. Hindi eh.
Kailangan natin dyan para yumaman.
Diba?
That's what we need eh.
Kung mayaman na tayo at wala nang corruption, what's the point of shifting? The whole point of shifting is so that mapabilis, mapadali.
Yes.
Lalong maging accountable ang gobyerno sa atin, lalong maging sustainable ang ating demokrasya. Dahil magkakaroon ng intermediary powers, all of those things that we talked about. As we outgrow our current republic, which was drafted when we were only 6 million people, we need better, modern systems of governance now to deal with the challenges, the complex, difficult challenges that we're faced with today. Yun lang masasabi ko.
Okay. Well, wow, that was really, really, really great. Ang daming natutunan siguro natin mga mga nanonood, and I'm pretty sure I really learned so much as well, Doy. I really appreciate having
Well, I'm
you
glad.
on
Thank
board
you.
kasi talagang
Thank you.
I mean, ang dami mong yung insights mo kasi are actual stuff that you get from your day
Oh,
job itself, you know. It's not
yes,
like
yes.
akin kasi mga ano lang yan eh, mga research ko lang on the side, you know,
Yeah.
parang hobby ko lang. But I have a different day job. Sa'yo, day job mo talaga yan eh. So, yeah, talagang ano mo yan. That's your bread and
Yeah,
butter, you know. That's what pays
yeah.
the bills for
So
you.
I see things how things could be,
Yes.
and a lot of people say this is how things should be. We should just fit this mold. But what I see is like not what should, but what could, what can be for us, how things can be much better if we simply drop the blinkers, not be subject to this group think that we're often confined to by the media that tries to control the way we think, because it's controlled by the
The
interests that
oligarchs.
are that have power and benefit from the current system. I see things from a different perspective, siguro from where I am, and so I see the potential what could be, like the best version of ourselves that we could be. That's what we should be aiming for. Eh. Hindi yung let's just make do with what we have. Let's try to maximize our current model. Hindi. Let's try to think how could we empower ourselves so that we could reach our fullest potential as a country. And that's why I come forward and share these things, because I see it from my own
Indeed.
professional experience na ganito pala
Ganyan
yung
talaga
sagot.
nakikita mo
Ito
mismo
pala dapat
sa
ang
South
kailangan
Australia.
gawin. Yun. Oo. Bakit walang ganito sa atin?
Yun.
Oo,
Actually, yun nga eh. Tayong mga nasa labas ng bansa, like in my case, I'm here in Singapore, ang dami ko nakikita na bakit nila nagagawa, tayo hindi. And I think that's the same thing with you. Bakit nila nagagawa?
And it's not because, alam mo, in the Philippines, hindi dahil matalino ako, magaling ako. I'm just a normal, mas marami, may mga mas matatalino dyan sa departamento natin, like yung sa NEDA, that guy, si Chua.
Kendrick,
those guys are much smarter and much more technically proficient. We have the capability. And one last point, the reason why we need to regionalize is mas madaling i-negotiate with 13 regions than 81 to 83 provinces.
Yes.
Masyadong magulo eh. Kung 83. Sorry. Australia, 5 states and 2 territories. Hirap na kami minsan mag-negotiate. Lalo pa kung 13, palagay ko manageable pa yon. Manageable. Pero pag pinilit natin, hindi. I-federalize na lang natin. Pero 80, lahat, probinsya na lang. Wala nang region. Nako, sobrang hirap gawin yan. Kahit yung mga technocrats natin na matatalino, palagay ko, susuko rin sila eh.
Oo.
Saka walang economies of scale eh. Walang
economies of scale.
Oo, kailangan i-amalgamate natin into bigger units para sila na ang mag-decide paano hahatiin dun sa mga provinces. So yun lang.
Indeed. Okay, well, ladies and gentlemen, that was a really, really meaty talk, meaty discussion we had with Doy. I'm pretty sure ang dami niyong natutunan. Pakidala po itong link na ito. Share nyo sa lahat ng mga taong alam nyong wala masyadong alam tungkol sa federalism, yung mga nagdududa. Make sure this reaches Juan Ponce Enrile. Make sure this reaches Sara Duterte. Make sure this reaches so many of the people na kontra ng kontra. Makikita nila, actually, kaya pala, maganda naman pala to. At ito talaga dapat sa Pilipinas. So yun. And I'm just wanting to share as well, punta rin kayo po sa correctphilippines.org. We have a huge array of academic papers, mga white papers na sinulat ng mga tanyag na mga political scientists and economists from all around the world na nag-research about different things. So parliamentary system, federalism, openness to foreign investors, all these little things na pinag-uusapan sa correct movement and the constitutional reform push, nandyan, lagi kaming nagre-research, lagi kaming nangungulekta ng mga ganito.
Use science.
We have the
evidence.
We have the evidence. So, yung mga sinasabi namin, hindi haka-haka.
lang propaganda, wag lang
Hindi
yung
propaganda, oo. These things that we have, these are well-studied information na pwede nyo makita. Ang majority, mga 95% na mga document na yan na nandun sa website namin, na kinolate namin at basically, ang tawag dyan, what's the other term? Curated. We've collated and curated them and made them available for ordinary Filipinos to read. Those are mostly 95% or more are written by PhDs. So, ayan. So, hindi lang basta-basta ang nagsulat ng mga tunay na eksperto. So, tingnan po ninyo, correctphilippines.org. Ang dami po naming sources dyan. So, ang dami rin namin mga videos ng mga eksperto na all about federalism, all about parliamentary system, all about yung economic reforms.
And also, Ryan, I might plug my own site.
Sure,
CUSP
yes.
On YouTube. We have a lot of videos as well talking about the same things that I've been talking about with you here today.
Yun.
But it's more of a monologue. I like this format where it's more of dialogue. Yeah.
Yun. Maganda nga eh. Yeah, so guys, go to the CUSP PH. The CUSP PH. That's the page and the site that Doy actually handles. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, maraming salamat again. Doy, thanks a lot for your help. Thank you. And I'm talagang really impressed by your institutional knowledge of how things work over there in Australia and comparing them with even the US and the Philippines. So, galing. Ang daming natutunan.
Thank you, Ren. Salamat
all right.
For the opportunity. Yeah.
Okay, you're welcome. Thanks again, everyone, and enjoy your Sunday.
I don't want to start any blasphemous rumors, but I think Monsot's got a sixth sense of humor, and when I die, I expect to find him laughing.